Good evening, Mr. Chair, committee members. Welcome to this evening's meeting. So, Mr. Chair, just before we get started, we do now have quorum. Councillor Osanik is not here. I didn't receive regrets from her. Just Councillor Holland did mention that she may not be able to attend, but she may join later. So I am just going to quickly run through the list of participants that we have before we get started. So the staff members that we have with us tonight, we have Raymond Garner, Director, Solid Waste Services, Paul McClatchy, Environment Director, Sheila Kidd, Commissioner, Transportation and Public Works, Marissa Mascaro, Manager, Transportation Infrastructure, Dave Rowade, Project Manager, Climate Leadership, Julie Salter-Keene, Manager, Climate Leadership, Ian Semple, Director, Transportation Services, Elizabeth Fawcett, our meeting host tonight, as well as myself, Julie McCarty-Jansman, Committee Clerk. And we have looks like one member of the public with us at this time. So, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to you to begin the meeting.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and welcome all to the committee meeting in the middle of the summer. And we do have a lengthy agenda tonight with 4 substantial items. So just before we start, I wanted to let the committee members know that if we go past 8 p.m., I will be calling a recess around that time, give or take a few minutes, whenever it might be appropriate, unless it looks like we're about to finish the agenda. And I may ask for a vote at that time about finishing the agenda or not, if it's not obvious. That said, I will call the meeting to order, and I'll look for a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda. So, Councillor Neal, Councillor Doherty. So the agenda is on the floor. Does no one propose any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, we will call the vote on the agenda. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Now just bear with me here. I have to split my screen. I've got 2 screens going, and it's not screen at the moment. It's been reset. Just 1 second. Anyways, I will. I'll have to toggle back and forth until I'm not live, and then I will figure that out. The next item is the confirmation of minutes from our last meeting on June 15th. So I need a mover and a seconder for the minutes. The mover has to have been at the meeting. Seeing Councillor Neal and a seconder. Councillor Doherty. Councillor Ostroff, just so you know, you're slightly off screen to the right, but if you raise your right hand, I will be able to see it. Yes. Perfect.
I'm having my supper.
Yeah, no problem. You can continue to do that way as long as we can see your hand. Okay, so the minutes are moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, we'll vote on the minutes. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Sorry, I've lost my, there we go. No. I've lost my window here, bear with me. There it is. So yes, we have disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing no hands. The next item is, I should have figured this out sooner. The next item is delegations. Do we have any delegations, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Chair, there are no delegations this evening.
I see there is one briefing from Manager of Climate Leadership, and her team, and 4 items of business. So we'll go now to the briefing. Ms. Salter-Keene, who's the Manager of Climate Leadership, and Dave Rowade, Project Manager, Climate Leadership, are here to speak to us about the Standard Community Improvement Plan. Ms. Salter-Keene, you have the floor. You have 10 minutes. If you need longer, at the 10-minute mark, I will ask for consent of the committee.
Great, thank you. And good evening, Chair and members of the EITP. Dave Rowade and myself will be presenting this evening on the proposed Green Standard Community Improvement Plan. Next slide, please. City Council declared a climate emergency in 2019, and since that time they have demonstrating leadership on climate action is one of the 5 priorities that Council have identified through their strategic plan for 2019 to 2022. Next, please. So on this slide here, we identify a number of the actions that Council have identified in their strategic plan for demonstrating leadership on climate action. And the Green Standard Community Improvement Plan is being developed to incentivize the construction of net zero buildings, which aim at stimulating construction of residential and commercial buildings that have a highly efficient use of energy and water with minimal GHG emissions. Next, please. The goal of the Green Standard CIP is to encourage new buildings to be constructed in a way that achieves a significant and measurable improvement in energy performance and environmental protection so that the community GHG emissions are reduced within the entire municipality. Next, please. So the CIP rationale is why do we need better buildings? Successful implementation of the Green Standard CIP is expected to provide the following benefits, which are identified on your screen. They meet the community GHG reduction targets. They will achieve improved life cycle value for building owners. They will stimulate the economic growth and job creation in the advanced building technology, renewable energy sectors, and they proactively preparing for increasingly stringent building codes as the industry transitions to net zero requirements. Encouraging highly efficient new construction will be an important means to help Kingston meet its long-term GHG reduction targets over time. Next, please. Stakeholder consultation. Since March of 2020, and we did come before EITP in January of this year, we have done extensive consultation with internal and external stakeholders to really understand the balance of funding incentives and what the funding incentives should look like. There's that fine balance between what we can afford and what will encourage the developers to build these to net zero. Recently, on July 15th, we held our public meeting as required under the Planning Act through the Planning Committee. One person attended and spoke to the application and spoke to the different levels of net zero, which we have identified and prepared within the report to you today. We also, as a requirement under the Planning Act, consulted with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and their input was considered as we developed the CIP as well. Next, please. And Dave will take over.
Thank you, Julie, and good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. The Green Standard CIP incentive framework can be summed up in this diagram with 3 components. So there's the building performance levels, which I'll get to immediately after this diagram. There's the 4 proposed incentive programs, and then each of those programs have different program parameters, all related to the determination of the dollar value of each of the incentives. Next slide, please. I should mention that all these building performance levels and incentive programs are based on the stakeholder consultation and research that we conducted over the last year. And this hierarchy is looking at providing the base level, which is the compliance standard provided with the Ontario Building Code. So that's required by law. The 3 proposed building performance levels within the Green Standard CIP are above and beyond that. And there are performance levels and third-party certification programs that are aligned to those building performances. So you can see at the top, as directed by council, this program is aiming for net zero energy, and I put or better because you can have zero carbon as well. And that would be the top level of incentive. The next one down is net zero ready, which is up to 80% better than the building code. And there's a number of buildings, third-party building certification programs, such as LEED, Platinum, Passive House, that are would achieve these levels as well. So these will make more sense as I progress through this presentation, but that gives you the main hierarchy for performance. Next slide, please. I'll be referring to incremental capital cost premium, which I'm sure many of you will understand, but just for clarity, this is the added cost to build to higher performance levels above those required by the building code. So the diagram on the right shows that the green bar is higher than the building code, and that is the incremental capital cost premium when we refer to this within the incentive programs coming up. Next slide, please. There's limited but some research on incremental capital cost premiums, or ICC as I'll refer to it now, for building above the building code. I found 3 studies pertaining to Ontario, and in alignment with the CIP performance level on the left-hand side, you can see the approximate ranges of that ICC premium for different types of buildings. Of course, it'll vary by size and different features, but that gives you an idea. Next slide, please. We also took a diverse approach to incentivization to balance the affordability to administer this program to the city, at the same time trying to influence the development community enough to build to these higher performance levels than what is required by law. So we have some that are more upfront in nature and one time, whereas in others maybe a multi-year incentive, which spreads out the cost to the city. And then others that can be cost neutral as well. However, and I will elaborate on each one of these in a moment, we also found out that there's a gap in the development community of knowledge and awareness. So we believe that training and education will also be required in administering this program to help enable the development to these higher performance levels. And this also a best practice of municipalities who already have these types of green standards and incentives in place. They also provide technical guidance manuals and checklists and training. So we also propose that as part of the Green Incentive CIP. Next slide, please. So starting now with the incentives, the first one is actually very similar to what's in the Brownfield CIP. It's a feasibility study grant that's intended to support what's called the integrated design process, which is used to determine cost-effective design characteristics required to construct the higher performance buildings. So these studies are typically done in a very early design stage, and they provide the developer and contractors upfront considerations of different opportunities to maximize the performance of the entire building. And we're proposing a limit of 50% of the cost of those studies to a maximum of $25,000 per study. The next one is also related to pre-construction, and the cost of borrowing money is much higher in the private sector. So the financing incentive, it would be a low interest loan from the municipality, but only for that incremental capital cost premium to build above the building code and only to those top 2 levels, the net zero or net zero ready. This would require a feasibility study as a prerequisite, and the maximum loan, applicable term rates, and other risk management measures would be further determined with the upcoming budget process. Next slide, please. The cash rebate grants are post-construction, and they're intended to be a one-time grant for developers who are either selling the building post-construction, or perhaps they're property tax exempt, such as charities and churches, so they wouldn't be able to take advantage of the incremental property tax rebate, which I'll explain in just a moment. These would be a maximum of $250,000 per project and do require verification of building performance post-construction. Next slide, please. And then finally, the property tax increment rebate, which is, again, very similar to the Brownfield CIP program main incentive. This is intended to be paid out over a 5 to 10 year period, and it is based on that tax uplift between the pre and post construction assessed property value. And I point out again, there are some tax exempt properties that would be ineligible, so they could apply to the cash rebate grant. And then there's also a maximum annual payout limited of that tax uplift. We are proposing 25% maximum per year for multi-residential and commercial office, and up to 50% for retail, because if you recall in the incremental capital cost premium studies, they had a higher proportion of ICC premium to build to higher performance levels. The maximum total rebate would be $1 million per project. That is what's proposed, but to put that in perspective, if that was an eligible cost for a project over 10 years, that would be $100,000 per year. And we are also proposing that that rebate should be reduced if the property owner occupies the majority of the building or pays for the utilities, as they would benefit from reduced utility costs. Next slide, please. So putting the pieces together for the main rebate incentives, those different levels would afford the developer a higher portion of their incremental capital cost premium rebated back to them. So level A, if you recall, was the net zero or better level. In the cash rebate grant, they could get a one-time rebate of up to just over a third of their eligible ICC costs. And for the incremental property tax rebate, it's deliberately just over double that because it is paid out over a longer period of time. And I believe that is my last slide. I'm handing it back to Julie. Thank you.
Thank you. So on this slide, we have the estimated cost of the program. And the program has been designed to meet Council's priority to demonstrate leadership in climate action and the action for the Green Standard CIP, as well as to address the extensive public and stakeholder engagement that we have developed and went through over the last year and a half. The overall strategy to manage the financial impact to the city's budget of implementing the proposed Green Standard CIP incentives aims to spread out the funding costs over the short term, as you can see with the grants, and long term with the incremental tax rebates. And only at the time that City Council approves the fundings for each of the incentive program will they be considered active in accepting applications subject to any established maximum budget limitations. Next slide, please. So the next steps, August and September this year.
Hold on for a sec. I just need the consent of the committee. We're at 10 minutes to add another 5 minutes to the briefing. By a show of hands, all those in favor? Those in favor? I can't see everyone on my screen for some reason. There we go. Okay, it's unanimous. You have another 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. So this slide, we are just going through the next steps. So right now we're bringing the proposed Green Standard CIP to Council and to EITP for consideration, as well as the initial 2021 funding support that we will get through in the recommendation. Q4, we will prepare applications for the feasibility study grants incentives and prepare submissions for the 2022 budget process. And through Q1 of 2022, we would continue with the applications and the funding resources and the anticipated launch of the approved incentive programs in Q2 of 2022. Next slide, please. So we're here before you this evening with the following recommendation, that we're recommending that approval of the proposed Green Standard CIP as it's consistent with related policies within the official plan. The proposed Green Standard CIP facilitates the implementation of this Council's strategic priority to demonstrate leadership on climate action. So the first clause is the exhibit, which would be the bylaw to approve the community improvement project area for the city of Kingston, which would be the entire municipality. We went through the official plan amendment earlier this year that approved the Green Standard CIP throughout the entire municipality. The Exhibit B is the bylaw to approve the Green Standard Community Improvement Plan, and the document itself is Schedule A. We're requesting that Council approve $50,000 from the Environmental Reserve Fund in 2021 to support applications for the feasibility study grants, up to 2 for this year. That Council directs staff to incorporate the necessary funding for the Green Standard CIP in future operating capital budgets, and that Council directs staff to incorporate an incremental tax increase of up to 0.25% annually beginning in 2023, as required as an investment to the climate change to enable the implementation of this Green Standard CIP. With respect to the last clause, the anticipation is that with the funding, it has not been identified through our capital programs, and we would anticipate that starting in 2023, we would have a good understanding of the uptake from the development community. And as I indicated earlier, there's that fine balance of getting developers and builders and owners to come forth and build to the Green Standard and keeping in mind the budget limitations. Next, please. And thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Albertine, Mr. Royd. And that was the briefing. So now I believe questions from members of the committee to staff about the briefing are in order, keeping in mind that when the business item is live, we will also have our usual procedure that includes questions. Would anyone like questions of clarification about the presentation? I won't allow any commentary at this point. I see Councillor Osterhoff, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. Are you able to tell us, the committee, in the construction process, what's the biggest cost increase that builders and the public would experience? Where is there a top 3? Like, what is the focus on besides energy, or is it insulation? What are they doing? I didn't read that and didn't see it. But.
For you, Mr. Chair, I'll have Dave respond to that question.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. It'll really depend on each building. One of the common costs that would apply to all buildings is the actual building envelope. So the types of walls, the whole enclosure, the materials used to minimize what's called thermal bridging or air leakage. But at the same time, if somebody was building to a net zero level and was putting in ground source heat pumps, that would be one of the higher costs. Solar can be high. So those incremental costs that I had showed you before, that would factor in all of that. I don't know if there's really top 3, but I would say some of the renewable energy elements would be in the top 3. And then I would say probably the building enclosure in there as well.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Thanks for that. It just gives me an idea what they're thinking. Thanks.
I believe Councillor Doherty had her hand up.
Yeah, Councillor Doherty, you have the floor.
Thank you, and through you. Thanks for the presentation. Would you mind sharing that with us? Because I think I'm sure there are other community groups that might want to have a look at that presentation as well. I know they can see it watching this, but it might be helpful. I would appreciate that. Also, I have some questions prepared, but I'm going to keep, I'm just going to ask 2. The first one, I guess, would be the, you mentioned that other municipalities have introduced something like this, and that the whole industry is moving in that direction. So we're actually helping the industry head where they have to head anyhow. But from other municipalities, were there some lessons learned of what to do and what not to do, for example?
Who would like to take that question? Go ahead, Mr. Roy.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, we consulted with Kitchener, Hamilton, Whitby, and Toronto. A couple of the lessons learned would be, for example, I think it was Hamilton only used LEAD as did Kitchener. It was it's a good program. It's coming, I think, to its maturity, and it didn't attract enough interest. So I think Hamilton had one applicant every year, each year for 10 years. And so I don't think that's really achieving what they had desired. They had also had a number of other incentive programs, nothing to do with energy performance, that were more, I guess, lucrative or of interest to developers. I think another lesson learned in Kitchener was underfunding the incentives. So if they're too low, they're just not going to make that much of a difference on a $10, $20 million project. So those are two that are top of mind. The zero emission framework in Toronto is very complex. Obviously, it's a much different environment there. It's a larger city, larger tax base, larger staff complement. But I would also say, from talking with developers, an overly complex system could be very burdensome for both the administrative municipality as well as the applicants. So fortunately, we have these pioneers who have gone before us, and we can learn from them, and they were very helpful to us as we develop this.
Councillor Doherty, you still have the floor if you have any more questions.
Ms. Soldier Keane has her hand up, so I think she would like to.
I didn't see that. Go ahead, Ms. Keane.
Yes, and through you, Mr. Chair, and to add to what Dave said, there are a number of municipalities over the last year who have now developed green standards. They're not tied to incentives, and they're voluntary, and there hasn't been that much uplift in them at this time. I know Whitby has recently approved them, but with not tied to any incentive program at all.
So if the incentive programs that you've kind of designed here, if they work to maximum, have you done any calculation of how much CO2 tonnage we might save, like maybe a minimum and maximum? GHG.
I will let, through you, Mr. Chair, I'll let Dave answer that question.
So the short answer is yes, we have. I don't have it at my fingertips. It's actually part of the climate leadership plan. So I don't know if that would satisfy the question at this point. We could certainly provide the answer through email, but over, I think, a 10 and 20 year period, it's fairly significant. We expect the first few years to be gradual, but it's quite a few tons per building when you're looking at, say, a high-rise multi-residential building. Sorry, I don't have the finger off the top of my head.
Yeah, that would be appreciated, getting those numbers, because that is what the aim is, really. Excellent, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Yes, before we go to the next question, it would be the Mr. Vice Chair. I wonder if you'd indulge me to ask a follow-up on the exact same question Councillor Doherty asked. Mr. Vice Chair, is that, would you mind taking the chair for that reason?
I will, and I recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I only have the one follow-up question. So we've been told we don't have the numbers at our fingertips of the carbon savings, but we do have a specific ask in the recommendation as to a tax rate. So my simple question is, will we have access to those numbers of those carbon tonnage estimate savings before the vote at council on this item?
Through you, Mr. Chair, actually, I'm going to work through here as before we get to our report after the briefing, and we should be able to get those numbers for you at this time this evening.
Okay, we can have it tonight. Great, that sounds great. Okay, I'm done, Mr. Vice Chair, and I recognize you if you want to go next.
Thank you very much. A couple of quick questions. I'm really happy to see that you use the brownfields model, which has been very successful in that area. I just wanted you to confirm that the way that this brownfields funding style in this program indeed will be revenue neutral, that other than the initial funding for the report that comes out, from that point on, it'll be a phased-in taxation model without direct cost to the municipality. Have I got that right?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that's correct. So we would require the funding up front to establish it, but it would be then over the payout years would become neutral.
The 10 years, yeah,
yes.
Up to 10 years. Good. My other question is, both the federal government and the provincial government may be the same governments in a year's time, they may not be. I'm just curious whether the promised green initiatives that they may bring forward would in fact create some funding for some of these projects that were municipally funding. Can I assume that there'll be an opportunity for the city to tweak the program and allow upper tier governments to carry some of the burden in future if they so decide?
Yeah, then through you, Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor Stroud. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Neal, and Julie may add to this, but absolutely, staff and as a city, we want to continue to work with upper levels of government to find grant program funding. Unfortunately, there's just not out there right now for this type of program, but it is the middle of 2021 right now. And a lot can change between now and 2022 and 2023. We know that we feel very positive with the application we have into FCM for the CURP model, the home energy retrofit program, and hopefully we are successful with that ask, and that program is very successful, and we can move forward with that. And hopefully there is a similar type of program that comes about through upper levels of government. So nothing here would stop us from taking advantage of that or tweaking as needed in order to meet the requirements. And it's one of those cases where the city could be in a position where we have a program that is solid and would be able to act quite quickly should grant funding become available. So that would be great. But unfortunately, I think it'd be great if there was something right now that we could say we could apply to. There isn't, as far as I'm aware. But staff doesn't recommend waiting until that day could come. So I think that answers your question. But yeah, absolutely. On board.
And the same, I would imagine, holds true to the Ontario Building Code. Both opposition parties have made a commitment to improve aspects of the building code to make it greener. So in the event that happens, it gives us an opportunity also to tweak our programs so that we aren't funding something that the province might very well fund. So I appreciate that. My final question has to do, I don't see a member of planning here tonight, but I would hope that there would be an amendment or tweaking of our official plan so that some of these things that are in our official plan as a wish list could become thou shalt instead of builders should consider certain aspects. Have you had an opportunity to talk to planning staff about that? I hope that made sense.
Yes, through you, Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we absolutely have been speaking with planning staff. We've worked with them through the development of this CIP, and right now, as it's indicated, it's a voluntary program, but certainly through the strategic priority of looking at our policies and bylaws that affect climate change, we would take that into consideration.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Doherty stole my last question, which is, I look forward to receiving your slide deck to keep it on file. Thank you very much.
And
Go ahead, Commissioner Hoopenbos.
Thank you, Councillor Stroud. So I just wanted to jump into this on that and maybe ask City Treasurer Desiree Kennedy, she's on the call, just to jump in on that and an earlier question you had, Councillor Neal, on the revenue neutral aspects of the program, because there are some deviations in this program that aren't identical to the Brownfields program, where some of it is incremental growth in tax assessment and new growth, but there are more substantial grants as part of this program than there are. So I just want to make sure that we're clear with our answer, because I know Ms. Salter-Keene answered it, and in a lot of ways it will become neutral because of an Ontario Building Code will be coming in over a number of years. Well, fingers crossed, and hopefully that does happen. But in the interim, this is an incentive program that does require funding. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page on that.
Ms. Kennedy?
Thanks, through you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, just to clarify, Councillor, your question on the revenue neutral and the comparison to the Brownfield program. So the guidelines or the terms of this program are very similar to Brownfields, as you can see with the various options that are available. The main difference is that with Brownfields, in most cases, Brownfield will create incremental growth for us. So if we were not providing the brownfield incentive, in most cases, that property would not get developed. The developer couldn't afford to develop it. So we wouldn't see the growth. With the green CIP program, it's a little bit different in that in most cases, I would expect the growth would still happen. And so it would be contributing toward the projected growth that we have in the budget. So it's not revenue neutral in that we've already got that growth projected, but we don't have the cost of the CIP, of the new CIP program projected. So just a bit of a difference there in terms of it's really not revenue neutral in that respect.
Okay. So we've had questions from 3 members. I've got a couple questions, but Councillor Senek, if you wanted to ask any questions, no? Okay, Mr. Vice Chair, I'll need you to take the chair again so I can ask my questions as District Councillor. Oh, no, he's getting up. Councillor Ostroff, will you take the chair?
I will, and I recognize you.
Thank you. So my first question is related to what Councillor Neal was just asking about the costs of the program. So, I mean, if you look at the what's in the sort of toolkit, or what there's more than one way to offer incentives. And with the incremental tax rebate, it's clear that it's very closely modeled on the Brownfields one, and we understand how that works. We don't have to pay up front for that cleanup. It comes as the tax rebate that goes through the years, right? So similarly here, we get a reduced tax payment over a number of years to pay for the extra incremental cost for the superior, greener building methods. Now, the question is, the 4th clause, where it talks about a 0.25% annual dedicated incremental tax increase, which sounds a lot like our 1% for infrastructure dedicated tax increase. So would that mean if passed by council, there would be 1.25% dedicated tax increase per year, every year on the budget? Is that what that means, first of all? So Councillor Ostroff, you have to recognize the treasurer.
Yes,
No
Ms. Kennedy.
authority about that, Councillor Stroud. Yes, Desiree, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, that is correct. It would be the 1% would continue for capital as a dedicated capital levy, and then an additional 0.25% dedicated to the climate change program.
Thank you. Councillor New, you stepped away just for a moment, and so I passed the chair to Councillor Ostroff. So that's who's got the chair right now, just so you know, Mr. Minister. So my second question is okay, so it's not revenue neutral per se, because we need a dedicated tax increase to cover these costs. However, I don't know how to put this question, but we're talking about standards and things that we would require, as opposed to something that is voluntary entered into in response to the incentive. Is there any part of this item that is mandatory or that could become mandatory with very little change other than a procedural change in the language of our official plan, as the Vice Chair mentioned, or some other method of making it mandatory? So, because we're going to come to this, the optional versus mandatory, and sometimes the only way to get something is by making it mandatory. So I would like to ask, how would we do that? And is that a separate process from this CIP? And how does that all intersect? Because I think we need to wrap our heads around that.
Yes, Mr. Hukemas.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So thank you, Councillor Stroud. So I might need Ms. Salter-Keene to help me out here, but the incentive program is based on building code requirements. So I believe it needs to, for it to be mandatory, it needs to be required under the Ontario Building Code. The jurisdiction ability of the city to change that is not there. Hence the reason for municipal incentive programs. You can do the voluntary. They haven't seen too much or very little success. So as far as an incentive program, as for the council priority, it's looked at the best practices, the engagement with local stakeholders and the public, and we've been able to put together this program that offers a variety of incentives for GHG reductions in their design to varying levels. So when you talk about what would be mandatory, I guess there's lots of things that are mandatory should one want to take advantage of the incentive program. But and there's various levels. I think Mr. Rowade went through various levels of achievement to getting to a net zero building, and the lower you go, the higher the incentive can be. But if I'm mistaken, Julie, please correct me if I'm wrong, but we're talking about Ontario Building Code requirements, and it's not something the city can change. We can do things as an official plan policy, like the Williamsville study and where to centralize certain growth and that sort of thing. But as far as building code standards, it's not something the city can mandate.
Yes, Ms. Salter-Keene.
And just to add to that, and through you, Mr. Chair, it was to one of the questions earlier, but certainly, and we need to keep in mind that by 2030, the codes will change. And as they may change earlier with provincial Ontario Building Code, these incentives may be eliminated. We may not need them anymore. So we need to keep that in mind, that by 2030, and through our stakeholders engagement, it's really the leaders in the community that we're looking for that would take advantage of these incentive programs. It's for a limited number of time to 2030, as well as those leaders out there that we're anticipating maybe up to 4 projects per year over the next number of years that would access the incentives that we are proposing this evening.
Thank you.
So, so then that leads me to I'll make this my final question for the time being. So knowing this is so entering into the agreement is fully voluntary on the part of the developer. The uptake will be dependent on the size of the incentive, clearly, if they can, and probably likely related to maybe some will that they already have to doing things a little bit more energy efficient. And so, with the added incentive, now maybe they can start doing things they've been contemplating before that were too expensive for them or something like that. It bridges the gap to feasibility perhaps, but it is entirely voluntary. Now, and as Ms. Saltkine just said, may become obsolete or redundant if the building code actually changes. Okay, that's great to know. But as Mr. Hugenboss stated earlier, I believe this is what I understood, so I'll just ask to make it clear. So is it true then that without a program like this, without a green standard CIP like this, we would, in the event that either a higher level of government starts offering things, or whatever of the things that might change in the future from outside parties, whether it's building code or other things, if any of that changes and we didn't already have this program in place, it would certainly be harder to take advantage of future changes. So is it true, is it fair to say that what we're talking about here is a voluntary program that would get us thinking about these things, so that, and get everyone thinking about them, so that as the changes come about, as they become more closer and closer to reality, that new way of doing things becomes easier to achieve, and perhaps the incentives go away because we meet in the middle, kind of thing. Is it fair to say that we would be saving a lot of time and perhaps money in the long run by at least having the framework set up in advance?
Yes, Mr. Hugenboss.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Neal, and thank you, Councillor Stroud. I think you said that very well. I want to confirm that, and that by having a program, we are readying the community, the staff on meeting these objectives in order to reduce or get to net zero on GHGs and building design. It's hard work. The technology is there, but it's limited in its applicability in this community and really across Canada, but in this community. So this program, as council prioritized, is incentivizes that change. We aren't seeing buildings being built. There are a handful of examples. You may recall the cities building Kingston East Community Center. We're very close, if not there, to net zero. That did take additional funds, if you recall, at council. One of the first decisions this council made, I think it was like election year, maybe it was right after, but of increasing the budget in order to add those building envelope needs and other aspects. Going back to Councillor Oosterhoff's question, it was some of the first things we've done as a city. We're in that building to achieve or come close to net zero. So that's what this program does. It provides that avenue, and the significant work that Dave and Julie have done in the research shows that without the incentives, it's not happening. It's across the board not happening. I'm sure with very limited exceptions, it is just not happening. So, but that is scheduled to change, and having a program now and council investing in it and doing it would increase that transition time. Would decrease the transition time, would increase the ability for this community to transfer into that inevitability that is showing as 2030 to have those changes. And I think 2030 is the end. I think there are staggered potential, if I'm not mistaken, Dave and Julie, where different changes are going to be made to the building code that are expected.
Thank you.
That's all for me right now, Mr. Vice Chair.
I believe Dave had his hand up as well to comment.
Oh, just through you, Mr. Chair, just to add to Peter's comment. Yes, by 2030, that's the expected date that Ontario would adopt a net zero ready standard within the Ontario Building Code. To be clear, that's our second highest level. So building codes, whether they're national or provincial, don't deal with emissions. So this is the city showing leadership. Kingston is showing leadership with this program because they're already exceeding where their province may be in 10 years.
Thank you very much. And I will return the chair and acknowledge that Councillor Oosterhoff has his hand up.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, may I speak?
Yes, you may. I'm vice chair, no longer in the chair, but go ahead.
Okay, so I thought it was handed over.
It
I
was.
really appreciate this discussion. It does, there's a lot to discuss here. So it's good to grapple with this. The financial part, like the 0.25 increase beyond the capital project, is that a discussion for later? Is that something, or, I mean, the proposal is 0.25, but if we found 0.25 in the budget, that's another discussion. So, or if we approve this, is it with this model, or is how we show leadership financially, is that determined here?
I don't see the chair on my screen. I'll
Right.
turn that over to Ms. Kennedy. I believe that would be for budget approval for 2022. Is that accurate, Ms. Kennedy?
Yeah, go ahead, Des, I can follow up.
Well, actually, I was just going to turn over to
Okay,
you. So
Okay, well,
yeah, I'll let you start.
Thanks,
Thank you.
thanks, Des, and thanks, Deputy Chair. So probably will need some input from Ms. Kennedy, but what staff is seeking tonight is a commitment from the committee and to council that starting in 2023, that for 4 years in a row, that an up to 0.25% tax increase be added, in addition to the increases that council has projected, as well as that incorporate the 1% capital. But this 0.25% up to 2.5% annually would be in order to ensure that this program, as designed and as estimated, is funded. If 0.25% is not needed because it's not the program isn't being utilized as much as we thought, or that there are increased revenues on the side of new taxes, new assessment, or should council wish to reduce that 0.25% by reducing other services, then all those would be options to look at. But this is a program that is meant to incentivize the development of multi-million-dollar buildings over a number of years. So without the certainty in the program and knowing that it's going to be funded one way or another, it would be difficult for staff and the community to be able to utilize the tools in this program without the secured funding.
Yeah.
But there are multiple ways councillors have to do that, but this is the one that council has at its disposal right now to ensure that without reducing other services or doing anything else to ensure that the program can happen.
I think I understand that, Peter. I think I understand what the proposal that way. The question is that if the 0.25 is not palatable to the public, it's going to be an election in a year and a bit, and so are we allowed to make a decision for future councils if it's going to be in 2023, or how do we grapple with that fact? So it wouldn't be in the 2022 budget, then it'll be 2023.
For
I'm
sure.
going to jump in there for a second,
Yeah, go ahead.
Councillor Osterhoff, because I believe that's a question really for the city clerk, because about making a commitment to a tax increase for a future council. But if Commissioner Eugenbos wants to respond, he may.
For sure, and thank you, Chair. I was going to say something similar in that, but there are a number of projects and a number of budgets that go beyond 1 year and go beyond council terms. However, I might ask the city treasurer maybe to just help me out there.
Yeah, thanks. So through you, Mr. Chair. So I think in this case, you're not really, and again, I'd have to defer to the clerk on the details, but you're not really committing a future council. What we're saying is that in order to implement this program based on the estimates that we have today, recognizing that, that $5 million over 4 years is our best estimate with what we know today, that we would need up to 0.25%. If a future council decided that they didn't want to do that and they had different priorities and this program wasn't one of them, then they could certainly reduce that. This doesn't tie their hands in terms of that in 2023 or years beyond. The only piece that we would have to make sure as staff that we were doing, particularly where we have the tax increment, is we do have a future year commitment on that tax increment piece. So we would have to make sure that in our budget projections, we had at a minimum that incremental piece, if there was any in the interim, if there was any incremental programs that were getting approved.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I think I understand that, and through the chair, but I just want to hear it one more time and make sure I heard it right. So the 0.25 or the 5 million over the 4 years is what you're presenting. So we are embracing that. But I wanted to be clear again, are we embracing it as a acceptance of the potential of the proposal of 0.25, or could that over the next year come through budget deliberations through another method? There's flexibility, because that might not be palatable to the public, the 0.25, but there might say find it somewhere else.
So through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, I think, as we get more information, the situation definitely could change. So Commissioner Huguemas was speaking earlier about potential grants that could come. So
Right.
absolutely that could. Growth over and above our projections could also affect it. So there's a number of things. I will remind council, certainly for 2022 and 2023, we do already have some operating budget gaps that need to be addressed within the budget. So we've also got those to deal with. But at the end of the day, it does come down to priorities. And I think the other piece of it, and one of the reasons that we looked at perhaps implementing this not until 2023, is to provide the team with a little more time to get out there and really find what the uptake is. So the assumptions that we've made in creating that $5 million estimate over 4 years, it has things in terms of number of properties, but also types of properties, and types of properties drives the assessment value. So are we talking, a large multi-residential building that has a large assessment, say of $30 million, or are we talking a smaller one that has an assessment of 10 million? That makes a difference in the incremental. So there's a lot of moving pieces there that could also change. So it's definitely not cut in stone, and there's also other options that could come up in the interim.
Thank you very much for that. I have a clearer picture now. Thank you, Chair.
Yes. So just to sort of summarize in one sentence, this is not a binding. I don't think the committee can recommend a binding tax increase. Not to council, we could recommend anything to council, but if it passes a committee, it's not a binding tax increase. What I understood from the answers is we would need something like this or another similar rearrangement of priorities for the same amount for that 5 million. The 5 million doesn't just pop out of thin air. This is an unbudgeted 5 million. And it has to be dealt with, and staff has recommended that we deal with it in this fashion. And if we pass it, that's the recommendation we're making to council on that. And of course, council can go in a different direction to find that money. But our committee work here is really to wrap our heads around what's the best way to recommend this to council. And so when it comes to deliberations, maybe we could have a little bit of a talk about that and maybe examine some more options. Yeah, thank you for that excellent question. We're still in questions, but we are there are no members of the public present at the moment, but we are kind of asking the kind of questions that sort of form the basis of debate. So maybe we should think about transitioning to the actual business item for future discussion. But if there are any more questions, straight questions, because of a lack of full understanding of what's in the report, other
Councillor Doherty.
position. Yes. So a question about the clarity of the report, but not and the briefing, not necessarily to found the foundation for an argument. Go ahead, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I had a similar question to Councillor Oosterhoff, and we'll discuss that further after, as you pointed out, Mr. Chair. But just want to know, we can development charges. Like this is a community benefit, but development charge fees and community benefits have now restricted uses, and I guess this wouldn't fall under the community benefit, would it?
Commissioner Hugenboss.
I'll do my best to start, but I see Ms. Alter-Keene came on, who does have a planning background, and I do not work a lot, but development charges, of course, are I think you asked about development charges and community benefits. So one, Councillor Doherty, the development charges are applicable to facilitate growth and development and to increase the capacity of city services to support growth. So they're applicable to the building. So if they were to be waived or exempted as part of this program, they would still need to be paid by the city through either the taxes or through a fund, just like this. So it would be the same. We still say there still need to be the same money and the same level of incentive to promote the net zero or close to net zero design. And community benefits are for increasing the density on a site and giving back to the community for an increase in density. So that's a planning tool that I think believe your question may be to say a developer would instead of giving community benefits, the city could relax those community benefits in lieu of providing like a cash incentive or benefit for a net zero design. Would that be fair to characterize your question?
Yeah, well, our community does benefit from reduced greenhouse gases, so that it could count as that. But I know that the government has restricted the use for community benefits. So I suspect this wouldn't fit that model, but it was just worth it.
I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Alter-Keene.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Alter-Keene.
You're on.
Thank you. Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. With respect to the community benefit, we will be looking at that with the planning staff and reporting back to EITP in Q4 of 2022. Planning will be preparing a report on the potential use of community benefit for the incentives at this time with the changes to the community benefits, and we will be reporting back to that potential use.
Thanks. Thank you.
Oh, now I see Mr. Rowe has his hand up.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have an answer to Councillor Doherty's or earlier question on GHGs. So based on some modeling done through the draft climate leadership plan, it's estimated around 50 to 100 tons per year. Is very difficult to estimate this because we're speculating on what the potential size of the buildings are and what type of buildings they are. It's not like the retrofit program that we reported on to this committee earlier in the year. We know they're all single family homes, they exist. So I believe that number to be conservative, but it would be about 1,000 to 2,000 or about 1,000 tons over the next 10 years. I think we could far exceed that though.
Thank you for that. Okay, well, let's leave it there for now for questions, and thank you for the briefing. We're definitely got some good information in front of us. We do have another item to discuss on the agenda that comes first about pedestrian crossings, but then this item is up again and we can continue the conversation. So that was briefings. We're now on business. 7A is guidelines for pedestrian crossing facilities. So this is like a different track on the CD, right? This is a totally different affair. There's different staff members here to speak to this. There is a report and recommendation. I see Mr. Semple, and I recognize you and give us an introduction.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm pleased to present the updated guidelines the city would use for new or upgraded pedestrian crossing facilities tonight. As the committee members may recall, the AT implementation plan and the road safety plan recommended a review and update of the city's existing pedestrian crossing guidelines to ensure our implementing policies best reflected the city's overarching transportation policies, particularly as it related to the prioritization of pedestrians in our transportation system. So the guidelines presented tonight provide a standardized approach for assessing candidate locations and for the planning and designing of various types of pedestrian crossing facilities that are consistent with provincial guidance and governance. The guidelines also support the installation of pedestrian crossing facilities in establishing connections to transit stops, in supporting safer and active routes to school, and developing our citywide and neighborhood level active transportation connections. I'm joined this evening by Marissa Mascaro, the Manager of Transportation Infrastructure in the Transportation Services Department, to answer any questions about the technical guidelines, the process, and their application that's included in the report tonight, if needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Semple. Okay, so let's follow the procedure. So we've got a report here from the Transportation Division and an appendix to the report that goes that has a list of, as Mr. Semple was saying, about the standardized guidelines. And so the first thing that is in order is questions from a member of the committee about the report. So who wants to go first? Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, thank you for the report and for this update. So I know that you were at EIT last time, and then there was the survey that went out to all Kingston residents. And I just wondered, I know you're saying in the report that you're still, you're currently reviewing the public input received. I just wondered, are you far enough into the public input received to know, was a lot of the feedback even more intersections than the 37 candidate pedestrian crossing locations, or was a lot of the feedback reconfirming the 37 locations that were on the your initial list?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. So we did get a lot of great input, as you noted. I think we had over 400 participants on the map tool, and then I think 175 for the respondents in the survey. So it's excellent. It's too soon for us to kind of comment on the final results. We're still reviewing that, and we'll be reporting back at the end of this year on the results of that. But I can note just preliminarily, based on the number of engagement we had on the map tool, we did have quite a bit of engagement on the locations we had identified, as well as interest in other locations. So it was great to see.
Okay, great. And just so you know, Ms. McCarroll, great. So I sent an email to Mr. Semple and to Mr. Cusson, right, about 3 sites that were not on the initial 37 candidate pedestrian crossing locations list. And I just want to ensure it got a ticket number. I just want to ensure that you have that information. And so I'm sending you the original email now, as well as the service request number that Matt had documented, because for those 3 sites that were not part of the 37, I have emails going back to 2014 when I first took over, when we had like the new boundary changes. So there's been a long history of some sort of pedestrian crossing over Collins Bay Road. And when the final refined list comes in Q4 2021, I'll be looking for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Senek. Sorry, I was just looking up that list again, just so I was clear what we were talking about. Just if anyone else is wondering, if you weren't here at the meeting, or if you have forgotten, it is all on one page on a previous report, the report from February 9th. What number is it here? 009, the ITP 009, 21009. So if you're wondering about that list, and there is a link in the current report that takes you there. That's how I found it. Okay, so would anyone else like to ask a question? Yes, Councillor Neal.
Thank you. I know that there's been a kind of ongoing debate over the years about unsignalized crosswalks, and such as the one in front of City Hall, which seems to be a kind of optional crosswalk for a lot of the cars that are driving along there. I'm just curious whether with appropriate signage, in your opinion, we're able to more safely create unsignalized crosswalks that people can safely get across.
Who would like to take that question?
I can take that question.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. In 2016, there were updates to the Highway Traffic Act that essentially brought into play controlled pedestrian crossing types. And so that's what the city has been installing. We actually have 18 of various types installed to date. And what these guidelines kind of speak to, which does include pavement markings and signage, and in some cases, flashing beacon or signalized treatments that would consolidate essentially a legal pedestrian crossing where motor vehicles do have to yield the right of way to pedestrians.
I appreciate that, and I think that's a good step forward, because we have too many pedestrians and not enough signalized, but it's very expensive, I know, to install signalized crosswalks at every location. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Doherty, you're up next.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, thanks for the report. I understand the importance for the 37, but and I'm sure every councillor has, like Councillor Osanik already mentioned, we all have some streets that are not on that list. And the two areas that I constantly hear about are near the Bath and Sir John A intersection, where there are on Bath Road, near that intersection, bus stops on both sides of Bath Road, which of course creates traffic. And on Sir John A, there's from the high school heading to the library. Both of those places have, as you know, heavy pedestrian traffic, but they're also close to a major intersection. So I just wonder if you did give those two areas some thought for a mid-block pedestrian style that you had in the report, because I do receive regular requests for those two locations.
Is that Ms. Mascaro again? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, I do believe, Councillor Doherty, that those two locations were identified in the engagement process. And so we will be reporting back at the end of the year on both the 37 we had identified, as well as the interest or feedback that we received on other locations. The type of treatment that's installed would follow the assessment process that's described in the guidelines that are here before the committee tonight. So there's kind of two stages to that process. There's a preliminary investigation where we would receive requests for consideration, like through engagement or as may come up otherwise. And we would do some preliminary assessment in terms of feasibility for pedestrian treatment, some data collection at the site, and some desktop review. And then we would go through a robust warrant and assessment process on the type of control. So we'll be conducting that work as we report back later this year. And then as we kind of continue forward with these requests and using our guidelines to manage those assessments.
Thank you. And I just want to also just mention that the crossing that was introduced at Norman Roger Drive on Sir John A is really fantastic. I've heard a lot of very positive reviews on that type of model in a tricky area where you have also an en route. So great work. Thank you.
We may have lost Councillor Stroud. Are you still on? Peter?
Sorry, I had another technical thing about my internet, but it seems to be back. Just plugging in the hard line now. The Wi-Fi is on the Blitz, on the Fritz. So that was a question for Councillor Doherty. Any other councillors with questions about the report? Then I think I understand, but I think it needs to be for clarity. So there are multiple ways pedestrian crossing I saw in the report, and some unsignalized. So could staff talk to us a little bit about the decision is made of what type of treatment to give a crossing once it's been identified, and is it prioritized as far as the rollout and the construction of it, and how decisions are made?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair. In terms of the different types, so yes, there are essentially two different types. There are pedestrian crossovers, and within that, there's kind of three subsets. There are types B, C, and D, which are all characterized by pavement markings and signage, and in some cases flashing beacons. And then there are two types of signalized pedestrian crossings, which are known as half signals, which are either intersection or mid-block signalized pedestrian crossings. And for all of these types of installations, like I noted, there's a two-stage kind of evaluation process. So there'd be the upfront kind of feasibility where we collect some preliminary data on the locations, number of lanes, types of vehicles and users and other pieces. And then there is more of a robust assessment process that's actually set forth by the Ontario Traffic Manual that guides us on the selection of the type of warrant, whether it's a crossover or a signalized pedestrian crossing, based on a number of kind of stages that we go through the Ontario Traffic Manual assessment.
So, so it's a provincial methodology that you follow.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay, and how is prioritization as far as when which ones go first and the order of work? How does that get that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a great question. So right now we have an interesting opportunity with the ICIP funding that we've just got, which allows us to consider a number of locations. So we had in the Active Transportation Implementation 5-year plan identified a number of candidates. We have from that list, 4 of them under construction this year. We had put out for engagement the rest of them, like the 15, as well as some other locations that got to the 37 through opportunities through ICIP. So we're currently engaging and refining the number that we would be eligible to construct through the ICIP funding and be determining priorities based on the rollout of the ICIP funding and other capital projects and plans for the next few years. And then further to that, when we receive new requests and kind of go through that process, we would consider it based on future rollouts of the active transportation plans and future capital plans.
Right, so in that process, is consideration given to the pedestrian volumes that are measured?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yep. Consideration would be given to pedestrian volumes as well as connections to transit and other capital projects that we may have kind of planned through the ICIP funding through other capital programs that we're rolling out.
Okay, so I'm just, I'm a little worried about us as district councillors if these questions come our way when people notice the work has begun somewhere and people have been asking for another one and maybe on the list already or not. So where do we direct members of the public to, like, is there a web page that will show the active projects and the next ones on the, like the ones that are imminent? Is there a way that people can follow that so that they'll know if their preferred intersection is on the list and coming up? And like, how do we deal with those kinds of questions?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a great question. We will have more information available on our website once we've reported back to council later this year. So we could direct them there. In the meantime, they could reach out to us through Contact Us. We would encourage that if there are requests or questions about it kind of at any time through the process. Currently on our website, we do have some information. We'll be updating our guidelines and putting those on the website for pedestrian or for residents to review. We have a map currently of the existing 18 locations that we have in place and the 4 that we're constructing this year, and would be sharing more information when we've determined kind of the future rollout over the next years of new installations. And then we would recommend that anyone who has questions or interest reach out to us through Contact Us for any other locations for consideration.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members of the committee about the report? Okay, so we'll go to members of the public, if I can find where that is on my Zoom here. Hang on a sec. There we go. Sorry, I lost it. There it is. Nope. Again. Still, yeah, participants. Okay, I got it now. Attendees 0. So that, Madam Clerk, does that mean there's no members of the public?
Mr. Chair, that's correct. There's no members of the public with us at this time.
Okay, so then we can go to the business item. So that would be so the recommendation from the package, and that is item 7A. Let me just pull it up here. Back. Okay. Thank you for your patience. So that the EITP committee recommended council that council adopt the updated guidelines for pedestrian crossing facilities attached as Exhibit A to report EITP 21.015, which is this report. So it's just a simple recommendation to adopt this appendix, this in the appendix and the just as stated. So we need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Get it on the floor. Moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor Neal. The item is on the floor. Debate is open. Who would like to go first? Oh, well, if nobody has anything to say, it sounds like we might be in the mood to approve this recommendation. Before I call the vote, any comments at all? I'll just, yeah, go ahead, Councillor Doherty. I also have a comment, but you go first.
I was just going to say, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to say to staff that really appreciated the detailed report, including the graphics. Like, it really helped visualize what it was that you were talking about, and I found it really helpful and learning the difference between the, particularly the mid block that I mentioned before, and that there are different options. So I think that was really helpful. So thank you for the very professional report.
Yes, and Mr. Vice Chair, I guess I should give up the chair so I can make my comment.
And I recognize you.
Thank you. So yes, I agree with Councillor Doherty, and to reference my earlier question about what do we say to residents. So in Sydenham District, I get comments and questions all the time about pedestrian safety and about pedestrian crossings. I don't think it's general knowledge yet that this amount of thinking and work has gone into this type of thing. I think it's good news for the residents of Sydenham, but I don't think they've quite have had the chance to see. Well, for one thing, I haven't seen this report, but nor the list with all the proposed locations that will be coming over the years. So I think what I might do prior to sending them straight to contact us about specific locations, I would actually forward the report with the graphics that Councillor Doherty was just talking about to these residents, because I think that's an opportunity for engagement for education to use the report itself. And then if they have any questions further to that, so like we did tonight, to contact staff to contact us. And that's what I might do, except that in Sydenham, I often say, just send me an email and I'll forward it to staff, because they like that sort of valet service. But all in all, it is great to have this level of detail, as Councillor Doherty said. I plan to support the recommendation and to help folks wrap their head around it as it rolls out over time. I know we talked a lot about the school treatment for pedestrian safety at Cathedral School at our last meeting. And I think a lot of that confusion would be avoided if we just raise the awareness of what's actually going on, and having this set of standardized treatments and a document that you can refer to, and a list of identified crossings. I mean, these are all very transparent things that we can share, but it's only transparent if it's known to the public. So that will be our job to get that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no further hands, I will return the chair.
Thank you. So at this point, we need to vote on the recommendation unless there's further comment. Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that also passes unanimously. Now we're back to the track we were playing before, which is 7B, and that is the, hang on, I've got it. Okay, so that is the proposed Green Standard Community Improvement Plan. And there is the recommendation with 4 clauses that we've already seen. I would like to just ask the committee that we reference our comments and our questions now to the recommendation itself, which we will have to vote on tonight. Of course, there was a briefing. We already spoke about the sort of meat and potatoes of the plan, but now is a chance to either ask further questions or offer comments once it's on the floor. The first thing, though, is questions only again. So this is questions on the same subject that we've already had a number of questions on. So I would ask that we keep mindful of time. Does anyone have any questions? Questions only for further clarity before we get to deliberations. Councillor Doherty, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. My question is a simple one. What are the last clause, considering we've just gone through the pandemic and we, have budgetary constraints? What would happen if we were to delete the last clause? Just wonder.
I'll take this one, Mr. Chair. Okay.
You're not allowed to say Mr. Hugenboss will come to an end.
What's that? No, don't say Mr. Chair.
No, I'm just making a joke. You can't say the world will come to an end.
Oh, sorry. No, the world will not come to an end. I think, Councillor Doherty, if staff wanted to make sure that this committee and ultimately council is aware that this program has been developed with a great amount of effort by the community, by staff, and by research of what has worked and what hasn't worked in other areas. And there's not a huge sample. This isn't being done in a lot of places, but it is a council priority. It was set out from very early on to find a program that would incentivize net zero development or near net zero development. That's what this program is set out to do, and it does require funding. So, council wanted to be staff want to be very upfront with council members in this committee that in order to do it this way, it will require funding. The recommendation does say that. It says that the committee and council is directing staff to incorporate up to 0.25% as required for each year in those 4 years starting 2023. Will it all be necessary? Time will tell, depending on the uptake of the program, which again is to incentivize and it's to get moving on actually having net zero buildings in Kingston. So the money does need to come from somewhere. We will not stop trying to find funding through grant applications or other alternatives that may present themselves. But in order to be complete and provide the full package of information to this committee, that's what we're projecting it will take. And it will be council's decision year by year to pass the budget, but we are saying you need to we want to be upfront and say that right now we will incorporate this into the budget for 2023 onward. But if there are other sources of revenue, or should council wish to direct staff to change service levels in other areas to find money, then staff can be directed to do that. But I would say if you pass the program, but do not provide direction in order to ensure it's funded, it will be difficult can't be fully implemented, and it would be difficult for the community to get behind it and make applications and spend the money up front needed to make those applications, not knowing if there's that commitment to do so. So that, I think that's my take on answering your question of what the implications are of not approving it.
The reality is we need to spend money to address climate change. In not addressing climate change is going to cost us as a community a lot more. But a lot of taxpayers may not think like that or may not recognize how costly climate change actually is, and preventative measures are actually a lot cheaper. So my concern is that people will not read the up to, they will read the 0.25% and say, oh my goodness, now we have to spend 0.25% more on climate change, and they'll go the other way. There'll be a disincentive for the public to support action on climate change. So that's just a concern that I have, and I'm not sure how we can get around that, but perhaps changing some of the wording in that last clause to still, because it is true, it is a lot cheaper trying to reduce greenhouse gases and for us to be active on this front than it will be with runaway climate change. That'll be so much more expensive. But how do we sell that to the public? And that'll be our job. So I think we as a group really need to think carefully in the wording in this clause. Thanks.
Okay, excellent point. But that last part wasn't a question, and I guess everyone's going to have a similar kind of question and then comment, which is fine. I think on this, with no members of the public here, I'm not going to enforce the rules that strictly, but I do have an idea of actually how to alter the wording very simply, but wait till it's my turn. Councillor Ostroff, you're on next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Right, the question, thank you for your leniency. I think Councillor Doherty does bring up the one thing, as you probably know, is on all our minds and certainly on my mind here. So, I mean, I hope I can say myself clearly enough. I just think that we can support this. I think it's done really well, but the final clause attempts to provide the solution as an incremental tax increase up to 0.2. I don't know if that's what was required, asked. That wasn't the ask. I think that we should allow council to decide whether it would be a tax increase and not as a result of I think you did very well said, Peter, that you've made it clear that it needs support. But I don't know if we needed to say it has to be a tax increase, maybe something different. But I was wondering, Mr. Chair, can we vote on each of these separately, or if we don't change it, or I'm eager to hear what you would say, suggest, Chair, for a wording that gives council the choice of how we do it.
Okay, so before we go any further, why don't we get the clerk to or maybe it's the commissioner. So if we deleted that clause, we didn't specifically ask procedurally what would happen. But if we passed the first 4 clauses and deleted the 5th clause, just as a starting point, because we probably need to add a different 5th clause. That otherwise we're not talking about how we're going to find the money. But if we just deleted it and passed the 4, would it be in order? Or what other things would that trigger? I think I'm kind of answering my own question, but maybe I would like to hear from staff what that would mean procedurally.
Mr. Chair, through you.
Yes.
So that clause doesn't include any exhibits or anything, so it would just be a simple amendment if the committee did choose to remove that clause.
Right. So procedurally we can do that. Of course, logically, it would leave a big gap of where the money is going to come from. So staff would then have to probably come back with this. I'm assuming this is what Commissioner was going to say, but he can confirm that staff have to come back with a separate report with other options of how to find the money, perhaps, to council or to the committee. Is that what you were going to say, Commissioner?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'd be seeking either a deferral or some type of direction from this committee or and ultimately council, I guess, or if it's deferred from committee to direct staff to come back with other options to either reduce the program so it didn't cost as much, or to reduce the projection of 0.25%, or if council and the committee want to direct staff to find where programs can be reduced in order to fund this. But I think in the discussion period from before during the briefing, the staff recommendation is brought forward because the program, we believe, does meet the intent of council's priority to incentivize net zero development. We are projecting it needing significant funds in order to do that over a number of years, up to the 0.25%. So we'd be happy to comment should the committee ask questions of staff of how maybe the wording can better reflect your understanding of the options available to implement that, as Councillor Oosterhoff has said. I think you as well, Councillor Stroud. But ultimately, today, right now, based on everything, the one certainty council would have to implement the program and approve the funds would be through, we project there will be a tax, this increase over this set number of years up to this amount as required. So that's how we framed that recommendation. So if there's further clarity, we'd be happy to assist the committee in addressing that. But if you want to drop it and fund it differently, I would ask the committee to provide some direction to staff in order to perhaps pause this and come back with options that you can consider so that there isn't that sort of increase.
Yes, as chair, I would like to just point out that this is the Environmental Infrastructure Transportation Committee. It's not the Budget Committee. That's the committee as a whole. So I'm not sure we can actually go into those deliberations. We could, but I'm not sure how productive it would be for this group. That's not the mandate of this committee. I did want to ask the treasurer a simple question for context about a different way of stating that 5 million over 4 years. So, Ms. Kennedy, to the average household, because we've asked it this way before, what does that 0.25% annually mean on the average tax bill? The average household tax bill for a year, an extra 0.25%. An estimate would be fine.
I would estimate on an average assessed value of a home would probably be about $10.
$10 a year increase.
Yes, correct.
Right. So that's one way we could change the wording away from the percentage, because it is a very small percentage, but do something we could cap it at a certain number for the average household or something. I don't know how exactly we would word it, and we probably need your help, but that's just an obvious way to go. Okay, now we've got questions from Councillor Neal and Councillor Doherty.
Just very quickly, the way that it's worded, I think, works very well. It basically says, if necessary, but not necessarily 0.25. It's not seeking to commit us to that increase. It's saying this is a worthy project, and if necessary, this is the amount of funding we're suggesting, if necessary, can go forward. With it clearly being $10 on an average tax bill, I don't see why we would want to alter that. And when all's said and done, come budget time, that's when ongoing budgets will be examined. So I'm quite comfortable with the wording as it stands.
Okay, so that's a very clear statement on that clause, but however, we're not in deliberation. So I think we're going to need to move and second the recommendation so we don't continue in this gray area because we're still in questions. So why don't we just do that, and then we can continue on, and keeping in mind you can still ask questions during deliberations. So I need a mover and a seconder for the 5 clauses. Sorry, it's there's 2 recommendations, and the second recommendation, but basically I need Madam Clerk, do we need to deal with the 2 recommendations separately? No, wait a minute. It is one recommendation. Sorry, it's just an introductory. It's just an introductory, the usual introductory. Ignore me, I'm losing it. I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation, and I'll just read it so that we know what we're talking about. That the EITP committee recommend to council that the proposed bylaw attached as Exhibit A be adopted to designate the community improvement project area for the City of Kingston Green Standard Community Improvement Plan in item 2 below, and that the proposed bylaw attached as Exhibit B to this report be adopted to approve the City of Kingston Green Standard Community Improvement Plan attached as Schedule A to the bylaw, and that council approve funding of up to 50,000 from the Environmental Reserve Fund to fund feasibility study grants for applicants submitting Green Standard Community Improvement Plan applications during 2021, and that council directs staff to incorporate the necessary funding of the Green Standard Community Improvement Incentive Programs into future operating and capital budgets, and that council directs staff to incorporate an incremental tax increase of up to 0.25% annually for 4 years starting in 2023 as required as an investment in climate change to enable implementation of the Green Standard CIP incentive programs. That is the recommendation. Who would like to move it? Councillor Neal, seconded by, need a seconder to get it on the floor, folks. Councillor Osanek. Okay, it's on the floor and Councillor Rousseff has his hand up. Councillor Rousseff.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Is it possible that it could be a friendly amendment just to replace the word tax with budget? That way, the optics or the perception is that it's going to come from the whole, but not necessarily have to result in an increase. I think it presupposes, and I don't think that that was what what's the intention. So I just think it's a softer word, and just and without complicating it to where I feel sensitive for my community that will not like the 0.25%, but will be willing to discuss community involvement, the budget increase, not tax.
Okay, so as chair, I need to rule on whether it's a friendly amendment or not. I would say that it's not a friendly amendment to take the word tax out because it is specifically, that clause specifically deals with how we would fund the plan, and the clause, as recommended by staff, proposes that we fund the plan by a 0.25% tax increase. So if you take out the word tax, it changes the meaning of the recommendation, which is contrary to the original meaning. So it's not a friendly. That doesn't mean that we couldn't still change the wording, but it wouldn't be a friendly amendment. So you'd have to formally move an amendment. We'd have to debate it and look at the pros and cons and figure that out. So is that what you want to do at this time?
Yeah, I would want to do that, Mr. Chair. I would want to move an amendment to replace incremental budget increase, and then in our own minds, we can interpret it how we want.
Right. So there's an amendment, Madam Clerk, to delete the word tax in the 5th clause and replace it with the word budget. Is that correct, Councillor Rousseff?
Yes.
Okay. So it's moved by Councillor Rousseff. Do we have a second? So Councillor Rousseff, moved and seconded. Did you get that, Madam Clerk?
Did you want us to display anything for the committee to see?
I don't think it's necessary. I'll just say it again. We're replacing the word in the 5th clause. So it's like the 8th word in the 5th clause, an incremental tax increase, replacing tax with budget. So it'll say incremental budget increase. And the rest is the same. It's a simple one-word substitution. That is it's moved and seconded. Yes, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chair, sorry, I just see Ms. Kennedy has her hand. So if she just wants to make a.
Well, I was going to ask the treasurer whether that simple word substitution changes the meaning of the clause or makes the clause nonsensical. Go ahead, Madam Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, it does actually make a significant difference. The program itself, because if the committee chooses to approve the program or take that forward to council, that is a budget increase already. The tax piece is how we fund that budget increase. So I think I know it's a small change wording wise, but I think what you're doing then is you're taking the funding piece away. You're saying spend the money, increase the budget, but you haven't given staff direction in how to fund that.
Right. However, the amendment's on the floor and we've heard from the treasurer. So this changes the meaning of the clause to kind of say what we've already said in the 4th clause in a different way. And also that 0.25% itself it's not a 0.25% budget increase. It's because the tax increase is not the budget, right? The budget, say if the budget is 500 million and you need an extra 5 million, that's an increase of 1% on the budget. Just using some random numbers. So it's a 0.25% increase on the increase and not on the budget, right? So I believe we'd have to change that 0.25% number. We'd have to ask the treasurer what the number actually is. if it's a budget increase. Because it's not, a budget increase is not the same as a tax increase. Is that correct, Madam Treasurer?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So in this case, it is the same amount. So we're looking at spending, say, approximately $600,000 a year cumulatively. So next year, 1.2, and that's how we get to the 0.25. In this case, because we don't have any grants or any other types of revenues to fund it, that's what the tax increase would be, the same amount. But in terms of, so the budget would increase by 0.25, but we would also need a tax increase, which would be the funding component to fund that increase. If we had, for instance, half of it in grants that we knew today, you'd have a 0.25% increase in your budget each year, but you'd only have from taxes 0.12 of that. So, but in the case that we have, because we don't have any other revenues, both numbers are the same. But in terms of the funding piece, we'd be funding that 0.25 increase in budget with a 0.25 increase in, up to 0.25 increase in tax increase.
So if the amendment passes, this is a procedural question. If the amendment passes, then this recommendation goes to council, and council passes the recommendation. Then council is directing staff to implement a 0.25% budget increase annually for 4 years, for the next 4 years, starting in 2023. But it doesn't speak to how that money is covered by the tax base. So then there'd be another piece that would have to come back from staff, correct? We haven't covered that piece off. Is that essentially what you're saying?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'd just like to bring the committee's attention to that fact. If we pass this amendment, we're removing the fact that the fifth clause, the original fifth clause, covered off the piece of where the money comes from, and it only says make the money, incorporate the money into the budget, and we would have to still hear from staff about how we could fund it. So I just wanted to make that clear. Okay, now that's as chair. So now we're in the debate on the amendment itself. So Councillor Ostroff, you have 5 minutes.
I don't think I can have 5 minutes, but I certainly don't want to question our treasurer. It's far beyond me. I mean, I can't even balance our checkbook. But I think I'm looking at this as a concern of whether we actually asked that to happen as part of the mandate here. I like what's been done. I think but it's not clear to incorporate a tax increase is, presupposing that that's the solution that we must have, and I don't think that that's accurate. I think that we can do better, and I think that we are an expensive city, and so let's show that we don't have to always increase something to do good. That's what I'd like to see us actually take the whole and what can we do better to fund this? That would be the right thing to do. It means we don't want to change anything, I think a real commitment to green is saying, well, let's not just dump it on the people. Let's look inwardly and how we can do better, and look at it as a budget, look at it as 0.25, and it'll come back again. If it doesn't, the budget committee, all that we have will say, well, maybe we have to, but we're too easily going again to the trough again to say we want more. And I think our residents, our community would expect a little bit better, and I do anyway. So if this is part of the whole, I'd have to go against it. I mean, later on, if this doesn't pass, because I don't think it doesn't feel right to me. We can do better by looking at the whole and being committed to a little contraction here and there to be committed to a green standard.
Thank you, Councillor Ostroff. And I saw 2 other hands, but we'll start with Councillor Doherty.
Thank you.
This is to the amendment.
I can't support the amendment as is written. It's really important to recognize that preventative measures cost money, and we ask staff to design a program, and programs cost money. That's just a reality. However, I believe we can achieve what I believe Councillor Ustav is trying to achieve with an alternative amendment, and I have prepared something and I will submit that. But the amendment in front of us right now, I can't support it, because we have to recognize that a program does cost money, and staff do need certainty that it just makes sense that they need certainty and commitment from us that we will help them find the money to introduce a program. And there's nothing worse than starting. It's a real waste for taxpayers' money if we start a program only not to at the end fund it and then waste all of that money. So I think we really have to be thoughtful in all of that. I'm sure we can discuss that, continue discussing that as we discuss perhaps the next amendment.
I've heard from two members of the committee on the amendment. There's 3 left. Would anyone like to speak? Okay, Mr. Vice Chair, I would like to speak to the amendment. Councillor Oshoff, you will have one more chance before we vote.
Yes, and I recognize you. And Councillor Oosterhoff did have his hand up.
Yeah, as the mover, I believe he will have a chance to speak last. So this is the pros on this amendment, as already stated, is it's very simple, and it removes the problematic word tax. I agree with Councillor Ostroff that we didn't have this mandate at this committee. It is very it is presumptive of staff, but it's also good planning by staff to have us recommend to council how we're going to pay for it in advance, and they're proposing this way. It is an increase of $10 in the average household, which it may be palatable if stated in a different way, and perhaps that's what the next amendment might say. But right now I've got to decide if I support this amendment or not. And I would say that it achieves some short-term gain, but it doesn't solve the funding thing. I would actually prefer to delete the clause completely, despite the fact that it's very well intentioned and it is in itself quite simple. I would prefer to delete it completely and have the discussion about how we find that money the subject of budget deliberations. We might need to add a clause that says, by the way, this is going to cost $5 million over 4 years, or 600,000 a year for 4 years, or whatever the number is, and have that in there as an unbudgeted amount to flag it for council to decide. I actually would prefer to find the money elsewhere, and I'm reminded of the transit improvement discussion. We had a special council meeting in community of the whole. I'm not sure if Councillor Ostroff was on council at that point, but Councillor Osanek, you certainly remember. We were told by CAO Hunt that a 0.5% annual tax increase would have to be passed to fund our transit improvements. And we said no, as a council, we said no to that. And we said, find the money somewhere else. And they did. And I know if you repeatedly do that, keep adding costs and keep repeatedly saying find the money somewhere else, you're going to have a big problem at budget time, and our treasurer is going to be, tearing our hair out trying to make that work, because at some point you can't squeeze blood from a stone. So maybe we shouldn't jump to conclusions. Maybe we shouldn't be presuming as the Transportation Committee, or in this case, Environmental Committee, that we know how council's going to fund the program. We need to flag how much the program costs, absolutely, for transparency, but we don't necessarily have to solve the funding problem tonight. So we either delete the clause or we defer the whole thing, asking staff to come back with options. But again, we shouldn't be deciding that at the committee. That's council. So if you delete the clause, and then, or replace it with something that says council will decide how we find the money, then we're saying that this discussion happens at council, which it has to anyways, because committee of the whole sets the budget, right? So we're trying to insert a council decision into this committee recommendation, and I think that's a mistake. So I actually favor deleting the clause altogether and leaving it unanswered, or perhaps adding a clause saying this is going to cost this amount of money and council is going to have to find that money, rather than jumping right to the tax increase. So I actually, even though I agree with the problems of the tax increase as stated by Councillor Stroff, I'm not going to support the amendment because I prefer to delete the amendment and have council answer the question. And I would feel great as chair to recommend the first 4 clauses and the general plan to council, but not the monetary part. As much as that must drive staff crazy to not have that answer right now, that's what I think needs to happen, because the 5 of us certainly can't make a budgetary decision of this magnitude, right? So I'm going to vote against the amendment, and I'm going to vote against the clause as well, even if it is further amended. Thank you.
I'll return the chair, but I will also raise my hand.
Yes, I take the chair. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and you have the floor.
Thank you. I think we're forgetting what staff have done here is what we always request of staff. And we also requested of ourselves, if we're passing motions that cost money, we have to identify where that funding is coming from. That's always been the kind of general rule around motions. And so what staff have done today is follow that direction. Councillor Stroud is absolutely right. We can choose not to support this come budget time, but they've identified where the funds, if necessary, let's not forget that it says if necessary, and it amounts to $10 per average household. If necessary, that's where the money will come to fund this program. And if we don't accept any funding, then we're asking staff to continue to develop this program with no identified funding, which is always problematic and not the way we normally do things with either motions. I mean, the number of times I've put in a motion and then been told, well, you need to cost this out. You need to identify where this money is going to come from, or the motion isn't in order. So let's keep that in mind. And for that reason, I won't be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton, do you have anything to say before we go to the mover?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this amendment just to get rid of the word tax increase, but I would probably also support, if this passes, then removing the clause altogether. I'm just, after seeing what the total costs are, like most of my comments are to the main motion. I'm not too convinced that this is the best bang for our buck of getting like a line item on the taxes specifically to climate change, just by proposing these green, standards of how to build brand new buildings. So that's where I have a problem with this entire idea. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Stroff, it's your amendment. You have the last word.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think that the amendment that we're proposing here actually is the best of both worlds. I think that it respects staff need to make sure that we do know where it's coming from. It's coming from the budget. So that's why I think that this is a realistic. It doesn't. I couldn't support removing it because that would undermine staff's work. Respectfully, I think that. As Councillor Doherty said, I can't disagree more than that, because of course we know it's going to cost money. It's clear. We're saying it's going to come from the budget. Let council deliberate with that. I don't think it's making a determination that staff incorporate an incremental tax increase. I'm fundamentally opposed to that. I'm not opposed to them saying it's going to cost money. That's good communication. We've accomplished that with one word. We're just saying to people and understanding to council, to the community, it's going to cost money. So let's take a little bit of time to see how we do that. But don't determine for us that it's a tax increase. We know, ultimately we know budget and tax are synonymous, but it's a different kind of way to look at it. And Councillor Strouder, Mr. Chair, you've set a good example of the transit one. I believe that when we as a city do these things well, we will find the money for this kind of thing. And I agree with Councillor Sanik a little bit. This isn't, it's a great job. I really commend our staff because they always do a great job. But you know, maybe there's a little bit more that could have been done on this. I don't think it was an easy thing to come up with. And so I certainly don't think that we should point to the tax increase. We can grapple with budget, we can and the semantics of that and the perceptions of that, then maybe surprise, surprise, we find a way to do that. And that's what council's job is too, not to be told that it has to be a tax increase. So if this doesn't pass, I think this is kinder. I think this is more considerate of the work staff has done by just supporting this the terminology and not removing it completely, because that undermines the message they needed. And as Councillor Neal said, they needed to bring. And so I think this does it, and the further discussions later how we do it. Thank you.
Okay, I will call the question on the amendment to change the word tax to budget. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that fails 2-3 with Stroud, Neal, and Doherty opposed. We're back to the main motion, 5 clauses. Councillor Doherty, you have the floor.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to propose an amendment. I'm going to read it, and then I guess I should send it to the clerk. Maybe if my fellow councillors are interested. So that we change the last clause to that council directs staff to seek grants and funding from sources including other levels of government and, if necessary, incorporate an incremental tax increase of up to an average, on average, 10% annually for 4 years starting in 2023, and the rest of the clause is the same. But what this offers, it clearly states that we're actually giving staff direction to seek grants and funding from other sources, including other levels of government, but from other sources could also be from other areas altogether, right? And that the incremental tax increase, which I wouldn't really know what 0.25% of an increase is. To me, it just sounds like percent of an increase sounds like a lot, but 10%, $10 on average, that I think paints a much clearer picture, and it sounds less frightening actually, because everything's going up right now for people, and 10% per year is more manageable than 0.25 sounds.
Okay, so we'll just hit pause for a second. So Madam Clerk needs to have the amendment in writing. So I'll just confirm. Madam Clerk, did you receive an email from Councillor Doherty? And does it need an introductory clause that says that clause be deleted and replaced with.
Mr. Chair, through you, I have not received anything yet from Councillor Doherty, so I'll wait to get that and we can display it.
Okay, so I need to use the bathroom. So let's call a 5-minute recess. And Councillor Doherty will communicate with the clerk, and the clerk will get the correct wording, and we will continue deliberations after that. Actually, let's make it 10 minutes because people may need to use the bathroom and so on. So 10 minutes, so it is 8:09. So at 8:20, we will reconvene. So this meeting is temporarily in recess. Okay, we're back. All five of us are here, so we'll continue on. Madam Clerk, did you get an amendment? Do you have something ready put on screen or? Okay, so this is the amendment that clause 5, the recommendation with respect to proposed Green Standard Community Improvement Plan be amended to delete the clause and replace it with the following. The council directs staff to seek grants and funding from sources, including other levels of government, and if necessary, incorporate an incremental tax increase of up to, on average, $10 per household annually for 4 years, starting in 2023, if required, as an investment in climate change to enable implementation of the Green Standard CIP incentive programs. So that's Councillor Doherty's amendment. Councillor Doherty, I think you have about a minute and a half left on your first round of speaking. Do you want to say anything else?
No, I think the amendment speaks for itself. I did try to address the concerns that I heard, but the clerk has her hand up.
Oh yeah, no, it hasn't been moved or seconded, has it? So that's a minute and a half left on your time on the main motion. If one mover and a seconder, is that right, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Chair, I was just going to notify Councillor Doherty. Ms. Kennedy did provide further wording just to be a bit more accurate. I did forward it to you.
Okay, so so maybe before we move it, we should get the wording exactly right. So we'll just wait for the email. So we're just on pause right now. So at ease. I'll be back in a minute. I left my juice in the other room. 1 second. Councillor Doherty, did you want to alter your wording at all?
I think the clerk has amended it, and I wonder if she could just call it up again.
Okay. So now it says, so it's the same introductory clause, and it says, right, so this is all, that whole bit is inserted from the original that we saw before the break. On average, $10 per household on an market assessment value.
Yeah.
So it's referring to what the $10 is.
Yeah, I have that. So we don't need the on average actually in front of the $10 because I had that there, but it explains it more. Like it did need explanation what on average the $10 is meant for.
So maybe, Madam Clerk, could we delete the first on average before the $10? Otherwise, it's bad writing. Okay, up to $10 per household on an average market assessment value.
Yeah.
Maybe we could add a comma annually. No, annually for 4 years starting. No, that's fine. There's a comma after 2022. Ignore that. Okay. So that's the amendment. It's moved by Councillor Doherty. We need a seconder. Hang on, there's my view. We need a seconder. Well, I guess I'll second it. So it speaks for itself. Would anyone like to speak to the amendment? Councillor Doherty.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, so through you, so I know that when this was at Planning Committee, we were told that not a lot of other cities have been this green, right? Have like done this before. And we heard tonight that the cities that haven't provided any incentives have had no luck, no uptake, so we know we have to provide incentives. For the couple of cities that have provided incentives, do we know if they've actually gone to an incremental tax increase to carry out, to implement the program? Like, have they gone to this, I don't want to say drastic, right? But I can already think of some constituents that would find $10 extra devoted to just, green building standards to be drastic. So do we know what the other municipalities have done that have gone this route?
Who from staff would like to answer that question? Mr. Hugo Boss, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. There's Dave. Sorry, I think he's just trying to get the video on. So I'm going to toss it over to Mr. Rowade to answer that. He's got the background of actually researching the other cities. I do not know that detail, Councillor Osanic. Thanks.
Mr. Rowade, you got the floor.
I apologize. I didn't have my headset on. Could you please repeat the question?
Sure. I just wondered, for the cities that have implemented some type of green standard, to combat climate change, have they found the money from within, or do we know if they've gone to the route that we're being asked to of an incremental tax increase, whether it be $10 extra or anything as a separate line item on the taxes?
You, Mr. Chair. So I believe Toronto's zero emission framework and green development standard is through development charges. I believe Hamilton's LEAD program is, actually, I don't know how theirs is funded. It is becoming a best practice of some of the leading municipalities. I think Vancouver has passed a tax increase, but don't quote me on that. It is a municipality in BC. And one other municipality recently did the same, perhaps Windsor in Ontario. That would be more related to the declaration of climate emergency and the list of projects that come out of it.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, then, like for this, 0.25% tax increase for the next 4 years, that is only going to fund this green standard program. It's not going to be able to fund any other things we want to do towards climate change, correct? Like, we know that there's a 4-year, $5 million price tag, and that this 0.25% tax increase is just devoted to funding this one program. That's correct?
Mr. Hugo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good question, Councillor Osanic. So there are a lot of items for climate change in the budget now and in the projected budget, and similarly to Councillor Doherty's amendment. For example, the home energy retrofit program is budgeted at $18 million over the next several years, contingent on a successful grant application, which is the majority of that funding, which we hope to hear back soon, and we're cautiously optimistic there. And then, of course, several other things like the electric buses that just were delivered this past week, and then longer term budgeting projections for for more fleet advancements in electrical vehicles. Just to name a couple. Of course, all the work that's been happening with the climate leadership plan, but then all the other things with the policy work that is happening. So those are all part of budgets that have been approved and part of long-term plans and short-term plans and medium-term plans that council has invested significant dollars in climate change. So this is a new level of service, just like the Kingston Home Energy Retrofit Program, where that was funded mostly out of some capital dollars from the city, but mostly from a successful grant application. In this case, that could still happen, but it does require an acknowledgement that there is cost to it. It doesn't stop council from implementing the $10, let's say, per year, and building up a climate fund that would contribute to this program and also help others if it's doable. That's an opportunity for council to consider, but we do know that what we're projecting requires this level of investment from somewhere.
Thank you. I still don't know how I'm going to vote, but thank you for that explanation. Thank you.
So do you have your hand up? Your hand up is up virtually. Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think we agree on that. And, you know, I just can't support something that has the wording of incremental tax increase. I don't think it is necessary. We are all saying that the money is going to come from somewhere. We're going to use creative means as the motion speaks to it, but it includes that. And I just don't think that's palatable. And I think we can do better. We're talking about opportunities for you know, the community benefits. I think there's plenty of opportunity to find a way to fund this, and as other cities and communities have struggled with it. I think that I'd rather go to Councillor Stroud's option of removing it then, because I just don't think our community wants to see that. I think they'd rather see us look at our successes with the effort and our commitment to climate change emergency, but we can be proud and say we didn't have to even consider or put in print a tax increase. And I think that that's something that we should have the courage to say a no to that. And there's lots of other possibilities.
Thank you, Councillor Ostroff. So still to speak would be Councillor Neal and myself. Councillor Neal, do you have anything to say on the amendment? No? Okay, I guess I'll pass over the chair so I can speak.
And I recognize you.
Thank you. Okay, so as we can see, we've spent quite a bit of time now on these two amendments on just this fifth clause. So it's fair to say that the first four clauses are fine. Right, that we think that the program has legs, but I thank staff for including the fifth clause, because it forces us to deal with the reality. And Councillor Neal said it well when he said, you know, when you make motions, you know, do this and then don't say where the money is coming from. It's problematic. It maybe used to happen with some individual council motions in the past, and now we've all sort of learned to include a clause about where the money's coming from. So that logic is sound. And we can certainly all understand why they've made this particular suggestion. But I think Councillor Sanik is onto something. She said if this was a general green fund, a general green levy, and it could fund other projects that maybe are more exciting to some councillors than just, you know, buildings built to a higher standard, then we could get behind it. And I think that's maybe the avenue we should take. That's an avenue again at council. We approve some kind of incremental levy at council. It won't be unanimous, but if it happens, you know, we at least can debate it and consider it. And it would have more upside to it if it included other things. Like Councillor Sanik, I'm not overwhelmed by even though we asked for this kind of thing, and even though there is a big upside in improving construction methods, we're offering incentives to a stubborn development community that we all know that they're looking at a different kind of green. Okay, the green that drives the developers, the greenback dollar. Okay, that's what drives them. That's why we need to put in incentives to get them to do things. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's a for-profit business, and that's how they make their decisions. And to just say, you know, go to the taxpayer and just squeeze more money out of the taxpayer because we've committed to being green, it's not really the solution. I don't think that the average resident is looking for. They're looking for, yes, they want us to be green, but they're looking for us to be a little bit more creative than just bumping up the tax rate each time, especially for just one initiative. So I maintain my position that what we ought to do is just delete the clause and have that conversation at council. And I would love to hear Councillor Sanik's suggestion be the topic of conversation, where we create a green fund that is supported in part by the tax base and in part also by funding from grants from other levels of governments. Because that's who we should be going after. You know, the other level of government love to talk about, you know, green this, green that. They love to talk about it, but they need to put the money down. And they do actually what they do, something that we weren't doing with this motion. They commit to things, but they don't cost it. And they don't actually make the money available, right? So if we all of a sudden do that and just put it on the municipal taxpayer, we're actually doing them a disservice. So it may, although the reality is there, it needs to be costed, it needs to be covered. I don't think this is a complete solution. I think it's the start of a conversation. And I think that we need to have that conversation at council. And I think we need to pass the first 4 clauses. And even though I really like a lot about Councillor Doherty's amendment, it really doesn't address that central issue of having a broader reaching green initiative. I think the time has come to have that hard conversation of how we're going to find the money for that kind of thing. It does need to come from multiple streams, and one of those streams is the taxpayer. But for this one item, I mean, just think about it. We're going to have other things just as worthy. And if we set the precedent, 0.25% for this, next thing you know, we've got another quarter, and we've got another 1% incremental tax use on top of infrastructure, you know, for green things, some of which are caused by the infrastructure that we're building with that other 1%. Because the infrastructure that we're building, all those roads and everything, that comes at a cost of carbon. So maybe we should be decreasing our infrastructure levy, or maybe the 0.25% needs to come out of that 1%, and then only 0.75% goes to infrastructure. I know that sounds horrible with the state of our roads, but you know, there's some tough choices. Or maybe we need to be firm with our external agencies at budget time that always go, some of them, not all, some are great, like public health, we came back at 0, but some go above and beyond the number that we ask for at budget time. Again, these are all budgetary concerns that do not concern this committee. Therefore, reluctantly, in as much as the wording is amazing, I'm going to vote against this amendment and implore council as a whole to make a bold move for a green initiative, for a fund that could support many different initiatives. And then we'd be having those green budgetary discussions about which green initiative is worthy of that budgetary money. We can't put this one first. It's not, we don't know that it's the most worthy for a 0.25% increase, and we can't start that precedent. So I really, basically, I'm against the solution as proposed by staff. Therefore, I'm against the 5th clause. Therefore, even if it's amended, I can't support it. So can't support the amendment either. Sorry.
I will return the chair, and I would like to make a comment, which I haven't yet.
Absolutely. Councillor, you have the floor, and then we'll go to Councillor Doherty for closing comments.
I had unmuted myself and then got muted.
Yeah, and I'll start your 5 minutes now.
Thank you. And I should have had 5 minutes on you as well, but I didn't. The reality is that this isn't just one item. this is a series of very, very positive, complex issues that staff have worked really hard on at the instruction of council. We declared a climate emergency. We declared a commitment to reduce greenhouse gases. This is staff coming back to us saying, this is what we can do for $10 per household in order to achieve those goals that you have set for us. And now we're arguing about some crazy idea that let's go back to council and let's create a huge green fund and let's let council decide. They are already following guidance that was given to them by council. If you have a better way of achieving that reduction of greenhouse gas, then bring it forward. But I can't understand why we're spending all of this time arguing about staff actually achieving what we instructed them and asked them to do. I find it really, really frustrating. Maybe it's just that this meeting is too long. I'm not sure, but it really is a frustration. Council gave direction. Staff are following that direction, committed to it, and this plan is what I think is a well thought out way of achieving it. And what are we talking about? We're talking about $10 per household. And if you want to say, let's reduce the 1% surcharge, take that to council. And remember, the wording of this is if necessary. We don't even know that it's going to be $10 per household. And so I just find this whole long debate is contrary to the instructions that council has already given to staff. And for that reason, I find it really frustrating. Does it show? Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. That was only 3 minutes. It was not really a rant. Councillor Doherty, you have the last word.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So really, the reason council gave staff the direction to come up with a program that is in front of us is because buildings is right next to transportation in the amount of greenhouse gases that are released through our buildings. It is the biggest bang for our buck besides transportation, like the electric vehicles that we just purchased, the buses, for example. So transportation and building, the only industry, the only other sector that's above buildings is actually heavy industry like steel and iron ore, which us as a municipality in here in Kingston, we're not going to discuss that. But if we're serious about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, then we have to have a serious look at buildings. It's just a reality. I agree with everything that Councillor Neal said. The motion, we don't know if it's going to cost $10, but we know it's not going to cost more than $10. I believe, I'm confident actually that staff will find other funding, because this is the direction where we have to head if we're going to meet our greenhouse gas reduction targets. There's no other way. If we're not serious about transportation and our buildings, we're just not going to achieve it. So therefore, we have to have tough discussions. And if we support this motion, it will be going to council, and council will be discussing what we have in front of us. So we'll have that whole conversation again anyhow. So I hope we can pass and support the amendment as it is in front of you.
Okay, I will call the question on the amendment. Can we have it back up on the screen one more time? And we did have a lengthy debate, so we know what we're voting on here. There it is. Council directs staff to seek grants and funding from sources, including other levels of government, and if necessary, incorporate an incremental tax increase of up to $10 per household on an average market assessment value annually for 4 years, starting in 2023 if required, as an investment in climate change to enable implementation of the Green Standard CIP and incentive programs. I got to get my gallery view back. Okay, all those in favor? All those opposed? And that fails 2-3. Stroud, Osanic, and Osterhoff opposed. Back to the main motion again. I have not written my speakers list, but I know it's in committee anyway. We can have a second round, but we're back to the main motion with the 5 clauses. Would anyone wish to speak? It is currently the same 5 as are in the package because both amendments failed 2-3. All right, well, I guess we've got to do my suggestion, which is an amendment. So I need to give up the chair, Mr. Vice Chair, so I can make my amendment.
I recognize you.
This could actually be dealt with separated clauses, but I think it's more transparent if we just vote on it as an amendment that clause 5 be deleted. Is my amendment. I need a seconder. And so, Mr. Vice Chair, you have to.
Councillor Osanic has seconded. So should that be written as our other amendment was written? I think that's the usual process.
Yeah.
Madam Clerk?
Madam Clerk, would you like me to send you an email with that in writing?
Mr. Chair, you can forward it to me and we can share it on the screen if you'd like.
So I will do so now.
So I would suggest a 5-minute recess and then come back for the. Thank you.
just a reminder that Mr. Vice Chair is chairing and has the floor.
Okay, if we can see the amendment as proposed.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you, Julie.
I didn't receive anything via email, but we do have a potential for wording that we can display.
I did send it, but perhaps this has happened before where I have an email address for you that's not correct. I sent it to the four of you and to Ms. Kennedy. Did the other committee members receive anything? Okay, maybe Madam Clerk, you could tell me your correct email and I'll try to resend.
Would be
Because I have the one that comes up in my Outlook is actually incorrect.
Mr. Chair, Councillor Doherty forwarded it to me, so we can display it here in a moment.
All right, I'll fix your email later, but
Thank you, Bridget.
maybe it came up because you send the Zoom invites with your name or something. I don't know. So we're going to get it up, but I need to explain it a little bit. So I thought about what I said, and what I actually want isn't exactly to just delete it. It's to delete it and replace it with an unsolved budgetary amount.
Can we, if you don't mind, let's wait and have it in front of us so we know what you're talking about.
It's in our emails through you, Mr. Chair. If you check your emails, the exact wording is there.
Okay, there it is. Do I have the floor, Mr. Vice Chair?
Yes, I recognize you.
Okay, so basically, as I was saying earlier, it's a question for committee of the whole to determine where the budget money comes from. And although we did ask the committee, or the council asked from our last recommendation to ask staff to do this work, which they've done, the costing suggestion from staff is problematic to some of us. We've seen that from 2 failed amendments. So this is a 3rd amendment that may also fail, but it's worth a shot, that just identifies the amount, the annual amount, and leaves it up to council to solve it. It does still include the word possible, the word new, because it is a new amount, which is why it needs to be costed. And it also includes the word full, because it is only the full 600,000 if we get full uptake. And we heard from staff that that has not happened in other communities. But if it does happen, we have to be able to find the money. And as I said before, just resorting to incremental tax increases, like straight onto the taxpayer as our only solution to budget pressure I agree with Councillor Ostroff, it's a problem. And I'm not comfortable going with that, as you can see from my previous votes. But I believe this one leaves it up to council to find ways, if passed, to fund this program in its full implementation. If this amendment fails, we have other options, and I'm sure we can do it. But I believe this is transparent, and it is a true representation of the decision that council will need to make.
Thank you. And I just have one question for our treasurer, Ms. Kennedy. Are you still there? Thank you. Just a quick question. How is this functionally or substantially different than either the original staff recommendation or the amendment that failed? Because it strikes me as just being a different way of saying the same thing. Perhaps you could clarify that for me.
So I think through you, Mr. Vice Chair. So I think the difference is the original motion that staff had was solving the funding issue with a tax increase. It didn't specifically state that there could be other alternatives like grants or savings opportunities or that kind of thing. This one is a little bit more holistic in that it's saying that we still have a funding issue. We still have to find $600,000. But then I think, and not to presuppose what the mover is suggesting here, but then that would then come to council to determine how we actually fund that. And it may not be a 0.25% tax increase. It could be something else.
Okay, thank you for that interpretation. I'm still undecided on how I'm going to vote on this amendment. I'm open to hearing other discussions or debates. And I will, I'll return the chair after I recognize Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Just a follow up to your question to staff. Does this serve the purpose that you're trying to achieve, the kind of security, the certainty that you need for this program?
So through you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you, Councillor Doherty. So I would say no, in that it doesn't direct staff to do anything. So that would be a major difference. But it does acknowledge that up to $600K annually for 4 years is needed. And that is what we felt as staff, we needed to provide to council and say, this is a great program. We think it's very well sound based on all the work that has been done. It's been a great job. However, it will require funding, has to come from somewhere, but in order to lock it in, we made a recommendation of how to do that, because that's what council has its ability to at this time, because there is no grant available. So I say that there is a difference there, but it does get the point across that council is aware that if this program's going to work, it does need up to this much money over those years. So that's how I would answer it. How to do that? If nothing happens after this is passed and council passes it, if nothing happens, I would ask that staff be given direction on how to solve that. Does council wish to reduce services elsewhere if we need that money? How would you like staff to come up with that money? I do not need direction to look for grants. With all due respect to your previous motion, that's great, Councillor Doherty, but we will, like I said, we will continue to look for grants regardless. But if there is a budget need, staff would need direction from council if it's not going to be the 0.25% at some point. Doesn't have to be tonight, but at some point, how would you like us to address the shortfall through reduction in services, or I don't know what else.
So let's say we get to 2023 and the council, we have budget constraints and we can't find that 600,000. What happens then? How far in this program have we? And you did show a timeline, which is great, but I don't have it memorized. But just imagine for a second that would happen. Would we have achieved anything, or is this a huge waste of money, really, actually, taxpayers' money?
So no, I wouldn't say it's a huge waste or that we have wasted time or not. Can't recall your words right away here, Councillor Doherty, but any agreement, any sort of grant or incentive that is available is going to come to council for approval, just like the Brownfields program. So, and we do feel confident in what we have, that we can start the program in 2021, but really in 2022, because you're not going to get into the full scale of it. Then it takes a long time to design buildings and do all that. And I'm happy for Dave or Julie to jump in, but I would say that it's really starting 2023 and beyond. So happy to seek and be given further direction from council at any point between now and then. But the program is still there. And like we talked about earlier, it's a solid program. If there is grant money that comes available, then we can go to that level of government and say, look at our program, it's good. We want to apply right away, and we'd be in a good position, whether or not whichever amendment you approve or not approve. That makes sense.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'll return the chair with the suggestion. Councillor Oosterhoff is waving at me, I think. So he's next up.
I'm sorry to inform you, Mr. Vice Chair, that you can't return it to me because it's my motion. And if you need to give up the chair, you have to give it to someone else other than me. If Councillor Oosterhoff is speaking, then you can retain the chair.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair. I think I heard what Peter was saying. I mean, all respect to staff. I think that what we're grappling over is important, and so it doesn't undermine the work in our minds. I think we really respect the work that's been done, and this is an opportunity for addressing one of council's priorities. But I hold to the fact that I don't want to see it on mentioned even in word print that it could affect tax base. I think that would undermine our community's commitment. This is a better way, unless we were to just vote it down as we break them all out. Mr. Vice Chair, I'd be open to that. That's probably what would happen next if this doesn't pass. Let's just all vote individually on each of the clauses. So, but I'm willing to support this because we want to call it a night here soon. But I don't want any disrespect to staff or the work that's been done. I think it accomplishes what I would hope it would. It puts it right out there, and let council deal with that, because we bear the heavy responsibility, and I don't think we expected the committee or staff or anyone to tell us that where we get the money, but that we is going to cost money, and how we're going to do that, and that's a perfect job for council. So I will support this motion for what it is, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
So I don't see any other hands. As the mover, you have the last word, Councillor Stroud.
To use your oft-repeated phrase, I will be brief. I should say that I thank Councillor Stroud for framing it in that way. This amendment is an attempt to actually say something instead of a fifth clause, like where the fifth clause is. Say something about where the money, the money that it's going to cost. There are some unknowns, right? There's several unknowns. There's possible future grants. There's possible future changes of building code. There's even possible realignment of our strategic priorities and finding savings elsewhere. There's ways to balance the books that haven't been discussed tonight, and there's also the concept of, if we're going to go to an incremental tax increase, maybe it ought to cover more than just this one thing. So, so in that sense, it was premature, as you could tell from my previous comments on the other amendments, to set the train down a particular track. This really doesn't do that. It just acknowledges the amount of money that the program costs without putting it specifically on the taxpayer. I agree with Councillor Oosterhoff on that is not fair to do necessarily categorically put all of the cost on the taxpayer unless there are no alternatives. And so those alternatives will be discussed by committee of whole when we look at the budget. And as we know, every budget year, staff work wonders with the numbers that they come forward. They have a total envelope in mind, and our treasurer is top notch. And And I'm okay with making, giving Commissioner Hugenboss and the rest of staff other direction once we've had more time to think about it and once we've heard from our colleagues. I'm sure we can find consensus to support this program. And with this amendment, it leaves that door open. I didn't want to give the impression that I was against that program itself. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm muted again. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the amendment that's before us. Yes, Julia.
Mr. Vice, just through you, do we have a seconder? We have Councillor Stroud is moving for the amendment.
I see Councillor Osanek raising her hand. So yeah, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. And I return the chair.
Now I can take the chair. So we're back to the main motion as amended. The fifth clause is reworded or replaced. And now we go to members of the committee that would wish to speak to the amended version. Does anyone wish to speak? Okay, so I guess I'll call the question on the amended recommendation. Should we have it back up on the screen, Madam Clerk?
We can get up here in a sec.
This meeting's gone on so long that the Tokyo Olympics have started up again tomorrow morning.
Mr. Chair, I believe our host is just having some issues, so I will see if I can get it here.
Well, we know that the first, yeah, there it is. First four clauses are identical as in the package, and the fifth clause is new. So here it is. I'm not going to read the first four clauses again. The fifth clause we just voted on is there as the fifth clause. It's moved and seconded. There's no further comment from members of the committee. So if we can just have the gallery view back here. There it is. I'll call the question on the amended recommendation. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that passes unanimously. Okay, we move on to the next item. It is report number 21-018. It is an information report on final regulation to transition Ontario's blue box and hazardous waste programs to full producer responsibility. We have Commissioner Kidd here to introduce the item. Go ahead, Commissioner Kidd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's an information report, but it's actually a very serious report and has some really good information the committee needs to be aware of. For several years, we have talked with committee and council and have presented reports about the government changes related to the Waste Free Ontario Act, a circular economy, and there's lots of terms and acronyms in the solid waste business. But to keep it really simple, the concept of the circular economy is changing all of the regulations that, in this case, we're dealing with the final two programs, which are Blue Box and household hazardous and special wastes, but changing the regulations to make the producers responsible for their products and their packaging at basically when consumers are done with them or at end of life. So we now have the final regulations. They've been approved for both of these programs. We have time on the Blue Box program because Kingston, there's a 3-year transition program, and Kingston is in the final year, which is 2025, in our case, July 2025. So we have some time on that one, but this report speaks to what the regulations dictate and how we feel that will impact the services and the levels of service that Kingstonians currently have under our current Blue Box program. And the other portion of the report speaks to the hazardous waste, which hasn't been discussed as much, but has regulations approved very, very recently with a very short window to implementation, which is October of this year. And our program actually, seasonal program runs beyond that for about a month. So the other thing I would like to mention tonight is that Mr. Garner, Ray, for all intents and purposes at this point in the night, is with us. This is his last week. I sent a notification to council last Friday that he has to resign for personal reasons, but he has a wealth of information and we've got him tonight. So this is our opportunity to take advantage of his knowledge and ask the questions that council feels are appropriate. So you probably won't hear much more from me on this. We'll leave it to Ray, but I'll happily join in if there's anything I can do to support him. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kidd. We will probably have questions for Mr. Garner. So this is all coming to us from the province, and the report is excellent, and several graphics that are useful. The one with the timelines, the little tables with the changes to the designated materials and so on. It is quite a departure from the status quo. So with the recycling program that we've grown to know over the last generation. So it is a big change, but it is coming from the province, and Mr. Garner seems to understand it. So it's your chance to ask your questions. Who would like to ask a question about the proposed, the coming changes, I guess, the pending changes? Councillor Neal, go ahead.
Just one quick question. I know in the past when this was being debated, what seemed interminably at the province, was a real concern about stranded assets, about the fact that those of us that really invested in a viable system might indeed end up at the end of the road with millions of dollars in stranded assets. Has that been addressed or by the province or by those that will be taking over the stewardship?
Mr. Gardner.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. That's a very good question. When it comes to stranded assets, the main stranded assets we have is mostly our collection vehicles that we have, and the other ones would be the recycling plant we have, which is our MARP. Now, the recycling plant has its own. When it comes to once producers take over in 2025, we'll have a decision at that time of what we do with the plant. Do we maintain it? Do we use it as a different alternative? So the plant can be used, for example, as a transfer station to transfer the materials, to pre-sort the materials, or to transfer it out. There is a lot of time to decide that because it is in 2025. So we do have a little bit of timelines to decide where we're going to do. There is also some early interest from producer responsibility organizations, or what are going to be our new stewards, on potentially looking at leasing our plant or leasing our buildings, so they can, when they take on the recycling or they take on recycling processes, that they could potentially use our facility as well. So there's some options that are coming up. It's a little early in the game to decide where the options are fully, until we understand who the producers are and what their intent are for the area.
I presume there's been no assurances from the province that, no.
So on that note, and I thank you for asking, there is no assurance from the province. The one thing that we do know is under the regulations, the city, the right to first refusal is not with the city. So producers have the right to decide who and how they're going to do their collection models. So from what we understand under the timelines, interested parties are going to establish themselves as what they call pros, which are producer responsibility organizations. Those are similar to our current stewards. They will, within the next couple of months, they have to register, and at that time, they will decide how to make the new rules, or how they're going to split up the funding, or how they're going to split up collections. They have to develop a common collection system, and they will be developing that at that time. And once that is done, then we'll have a better understanding of our positions and who we'll be dealing with.
Thank you very much. And just very quickly to Ms. Kidd, I would presume that this information report will go to council as a whole as well in information reports.
Yeah, through you and through the chair. Yes, so the all items on the committee agenda are presented and available to members of the committee, or to members of council. So the other thing we can do is I'll support it with some references as we come over the next few months, with some council updates and referring back to this report, because I think this is sort of the turning point in this report, where we now have solid information in terms of finalized regs and things to work with. So there will be additional information as well. And yeah, it will be important for all of council to understand.
Yeah. So what I was suggesting was that it would appear in the information section of the agenda. Yes, we all have access to every committee. I'm not sure every member of council reads every report that goes to every committee. Mm-hmm. So that, I think it's an important report. If we could do that, that would be great.
And if I may, I think that might be something that we need the clerk to help with.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I was wondering, Madam Clerk, would we need a motion from the committee if we wanted to highlight this somehow to council in a way that's separate from the way an information report would normally go?
Mr. Chair, through you, I'm not 100% sure as to for the, like, as in terms of the motion putting to council. I can double check though and get back to the committee on that.
If it's a matter of information sharing, it doesn't need extra direction, I don't think, but maybe somebody needs to do it, I guess. So I don't know, Commissioner, you probably would be the one to do that. If you could somehow, I don't know how you would normally do this, so that there'd be a higher likelihood that it would be processed by all members of council.
Through you, Mr. Yeah, I haven't really hit that before, but perhaps some of the councillors that have a lot more experience in these matters, it may be if there was even a motion that this information be presented to council in an information report or something. I know what you mean. With information reports, it gets hard to do that. So just looking for some direction.
Yeah, maybe Madam Clerk has an idea. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, through you, if it's just in terms of the councillors, all of council receiving the report, we can put on the council share for councillors to have access to it. but the information report would not go forward to council.
Right. So I guess what I hear from that, Councillor Neal, I would need a motion of some sort from the committee.
I'm happy to do that, but I think it's when we get things as information reports, we have a legitimate reason to ask questions at council. If it's in just as on council share or elsewhere, other councillors won't have the opportunity to actually ask clarifying questions. And it's my understanding that the information reports go on the agenda just with the recommendation of commissioners of those various departments. So perhaps the clerk can clarify that with Janet or John, and we can try to get it on. It's probably
Well, I have an idea.
too late. It's probably too late for next week, but for
Yeah.
this.
I was going to ask staff if this, because these changes are coming, and there is a timeline in October already that we need to be aware of, but could we not direct staff to bring an information report to council? It doesn't have to be on this council meeting, but if the timeline isn't that short, could we not get this same report on an information report to council? Is that something that the committee can recommend? Yes, Madam Clerk.
Yeah, so staff can write a separate report to an information report to go to council. A motion wouldn't be needed. Staff would just have to agree to bring the information report to council.
Okay, so then I guess, is that what you're asking, Councillor Neal, that this come on
Exactly.
the information report?
That's exactly what I'm asking.
Okay, so
Thanks,
Commissioner Kidd, is that acceptable?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. I might have to figure out a couple of pieces on how to do it, but I do think it's important. I do think that that this is an important topic that needs to be on everyone's agenda. And much like the conversation that you had on this relates to climate change and our services and programs related to diversion. So it's a pretty big topic. So you can leave it with me. I will find a way to get this on a council agenda. And it may be, so the blue box regulations, we have some time on that. What we're running tight on and what we've talked to in the report is that we have some more information that we're going to have to bring forward to committee and council or directly to council as it relates to the household hazardous products. And it may be through that, maybe in as the information is available into October, early November, that I can bring something and re-propose this report as well at the same time.
Okay.
So I think so.
That's great. Any other questions from members of the committee? Councillor Sanek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Neal was just asking about how the changes will look from the city side of things. When I was reading the report over the weekend, I was wondering how these changes look like from like the resident side. So does it look like it's going to be so bad that we're not going to, that the producers aren't going to be providing, like a pickup at people's houses anymore? Or like Mr. Gardner, will that, like, has the government made a commitment that from that standpoint, it's going to be unchanged? And then since Commissioner Kidd was just talking about the hazardous waste, does that mean that residents won't be able to drop off paint and batteries and that sort of thing to the city? Like, I was hoping with this that the government would put the ownership with the producers, but now the city would be able to charge the producers how much is costing the city. Like, I was hoping we would just be recovered instead of the government, right? We'd be recovering the cost from the producer. But is it really so bad that Like that's not going to be happening. We're going to be bringing our recyclables to some depot. Everyone will be driving there just like we do at CARC. Everybody drives their garden waste to one central place. Like, what does this mean for the end user? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Ms. Chair. Very good questions, and I'm going to take them separately because they're two very different situations. The blue box regs, they were more detailed. There was a lot more thinking, a lot more involved in the development of those regulations, and there's a lot more time. So the blue box regulations, the way they're worded, if you currently have curbside collections, they have to mirror the curbside collections. So residents will continue to have, or they would continue to be provided a curbside collection or the same type of collections that the municipality is currently providing as far as it goes for the way they're collecting their waste. So if we are providing curbside collection for waste, they would have to provide curbside collection also for the recycling. Now, some of the changes are, as far as the recycling, we won't get any, we won't have as much, how do you say, control over like the diversion numbers, because we won't always get the numbers of what, like how we calculate our diversion numbers right now. Currently, we collect our diversion numbers based on how much tonnages we collect and how much tonnages we collect for garbage and versus recycling. So the recycling targets are moving away from tonnages to capture rates. So they're trying to capture 50, 60, or 70% depending on the materials that they're doing. So it means that we have to think a little bit differently in how we're looking at our diversion numbers, or what we can control moving forward after 2020. Well, the new programs come in. We transition in 2025, but they have to maintain the current programs as they were set in August 15, 2019 until 2026. And then the new rules come into effect in 2026. So it's like if we add something new to the programs now, like to some new recycling programs or some new recycling items to our programs, producers in 2025 are only going to be required to do what we were doing in 2019. So we're almost better off to avoid confusion for the residents, just to stay status quo with how we're collecting materials and everything else until 2025. Once 2025 comes in, producers will have a new collection system, which is they're trying to get a province-wide similar system. So everywhere in the province is similar. So that's going to help residents as well. And also when it comes to blue box, it's a much more extensive, more materials have been added, but they're trying to get common materials that's in most common recycling programs across the province. So it's a little bit more common, easier for residents, especially when residents move from one district to another district, but it's all the same. It also, by doing so, it also allows producers and producer responsibility organizations to have a more common processing system and everything else. So they're easier to have, let's say, municipalities or more districts to have using, let's say, a single stream MRF or the same type of recycling plant. So you can have more materials going to one spot being recycled in the same way, and then you have more market value and easier to control the markets when you have a greater volume of materials. So that's when it comes to the blue box regulations, we're in very good shape, just because we have not time, and it also lines up with our contracts very well. And we're in a very good position because the province did give us a lot of time, and there was a lot of thinking that went into it. And we do have some bigger municipalities and other locations that are going prior to us. We will get a chance to see how that is affecting them. And there's going to be some decisions that's going to need to be made, for example, on how we collect for parks and other locations. There's some locations, as we mentioned, that are not included currently, that we're currently collecting. So how do we provide service, or how is that service gets provided? There may be some discussions or some negotiations that be done with producers. For example, BIAs, businesses and VIAs. They're not included in these programs. We're currently providing services. They won't be required moving forward, so we'll have to make decisions on what happens there. But as far as the Blue Box program, I think it's a much more robust program that they have in place. Now, when it comes to the household hazardous waste program, which is now called they're now calling it the HSP, which is the hazardous product special program. So that has been done and put together more hastily. So there's a lot of materials in that program that are not going to be, we're currently collecting, that they will not be part of the new regulations. Items like, they've included items like oil filters and everything else, but waste oil itself is not into the new program. Fertilizers, from what we got as far as fertilizers, the fertilizers are in the programs, but they only have to register. There's no collection issues and there's no collection targets in fertilizers. So when they're looking at fertilizers, their goal is to inform residents to use up what they have and to look at their local municipalities for how to properly dispose of. So it's pretty vague and pretty open. And even some of the potential new producer responsibility organizations, which are kind of stewards, are having a harder time grasping this regulation just because of the number of things that are in or out. From what I've seen so far, the producers are looking at trying to keep status quo as how the Stewardship Ontarios are funding and their numbers that they were funding us. So we have nothing from them yet because they're still forming, and they're going to be forming until around September. And then once in September, they're going to come to us, like companies like Product Care, which are going to be a pro. They're going to looking to come to the municipalities and renegotiate how they're funding our programs. And at that point, we will have to see if their funding actually meets exactly like you said. Are they paying us fully for the materials we're collecting, or are they just willing to pay us as they're currently doing now for a portion or a percentage of the materials that we're collecting? And that's what I believe is going to happen. I believe that they're going to, because they won't have all the producers registered under them, there may be different producers. So if they have, let's say, 80% of producers for paint, and they may tell us whatever they're collecting, they're only going to pay us for 80% of the paint that they collect, and then we'll be on the city will be on responsible for the rest of the collection costs of that program, which is similar to what we're doing now. So there's a chance that if we decide to go with the producers and stay with the producers, that and sign up with them, that our costs will remain the same for the next year, and there's a chance that it will actually increase because there's some products, like as I said before, have been removed. Those products include like fire extinguishers, propane, reusable propane tanks, which we're currently getting a lot. Single-use propane tanks are actually in the program, but we'd have to sign up with a steward or a producer responsibility organization to get our funding back from that. So there's a lot of small pieces, more pieces that are in this program, and it's like I said, it was done very hastily, and the timelines are very short.
Thank you very much, through you, Mr. Chair, for that very detailed reply, and we're going to miss you very much, Director Gardner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Ostroff, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you. Lisa must have read my notes because I was going to ask you, Ray, to paint the picture, and you did a good job of that. Thank you. And yes, I echo her words. We regret to see you go, but we wish you well. And we're sorry to hear that. You mentioned that there are other municipalities doing this sooner. Is that, did I hear that correctly?
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so that's a very good question. When it comes again, I'm going to answer this in two parts. For the Blue Box program, you're correct. Some municipalities, Toronto, Ottawa, for example, are moving forward. They're transitioning in actually in 3 phases. So Ottawa, Toronto are going in 2023. Other municipalities are going in 2024, and we are going in 2025. As I said, with the Blue Box program, there was a lot more planning, so it's more district. So when you look at the areas that are moving together, they're more centralized areas that are all around each other. For example, most of Eastern Ontario, like Ottawa, Clarence, Rockland, those areas around Ottawa are all going together at the same time. And then you're looking at areas, municipalities around us are all like, they made sure there were small pieces here and there that were left. They really did a good job of grouping municipalities as much as they can closer to their contracts when the contracts are ended. When it comes to hazardous waste, the whole province is moving on October 31st at the same time. So like, again, it was a little bit more hasty, and everybody's moving at the same time into this program.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, obviously, we're going to have a lot of challenges. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how the municipalities respond to the mass. As a rural councillor, I live in fear of this change because I always thanked you for your quick, and the city does a fantastic job, Commissioner Kidd, responding to rogue and illegal dumping in the rural area. And I always appreciate it that they get there on the day I call or take a picture of it. I just worry about this kind of thing because there's going to be a slow uptake, and you know, we have lots of challenges ahead. So I think they were wise to, as Councillor Neal was saying, get council on board, and we're going to need this glide path and we can't become complacent. We're going to need it to all hands on deck to help make this happen. It looks like a big challenge ahead of us. 6 years ago, when I started on council, I went to AMO, and the room was full at AMO conference. Like, you get standing room only. That's 6 years, and it's now all of a sudden, you know, it's just taking a long time to come together. I think everybody's scared of it. So hope it hasn't scared you away, Raymond. Thank you for what you're doing.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Okay, well, thank you very much. And I echo the committee's comments. It was great to hear from you today, and good luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're now back to the next item on the agenda, and that is, maybe it's the last, it must be at the last one by now. Yes, it's the report received from the Kingston Environmental Advisory Forum. And then the recommendation is has one clause that the 2020 Keefe report card be approved as a summary of the work accomplished by Keefe. And is there anyone here from staff to introduce this item? We could go to Councillor Neal, who sits on Keefe. All right, well, Councillor Neal, you have the floor.
Actually, I was just moving the motion, and
okay.
Councillor Doherty is also on that committee. So
okay, so sure. Well, let's move the motion, and then we can go from there. So moved by Councillor Neal, second by Councillor Osanek. I've already read the recommendation. Questions are in order, or Councillor Osanek, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you too. I know that Councillor Doherty is also on Keefe, I think, right? So for the councillors that were at the last Keefe meeting, right? I think this recommendation, from what I remember on the weekend, it says that we are supposed to get some sort of progress report later in the fall, because some of the staff that were working on it were affected by like the COVID outcomes. So does it really look like we might actually get a version of the statement of the environment by the end of the year, like, or we're going to get one by the end of the term? Are we actually going to get this SOE, a published SOE, you think, by the end of our term? Was that the feeling from the meeting?
Councillor Doherty?
Yeah, we got the sense. We did ask that. Several people asked that question at the meeting. It was clear to staff that we are eager to see the report, and Mr. McClatchy, I see, is here too. I'm sure, but we certainly got the sense that it is coming.
Thanks. That was my question. It's been so important. It's really important, and I really want to see the report card, some version of the report card, by the end of next year. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Doherty.
I wonder if we could ask through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. McClatchy to also answer that question. It's just for everybody because his team has been working on it.
Okay, Mr. McClatchy, are you here? And could you speak to what was said at Keith about the state of the environment?
I am here. I hope everybody can hear me very good tonight. Are you able to hear me? I do apologize.
No, we can hear you. We just can't see you. We can hear you fine. We just can't see you.
Okay, that's fine. I think it'll work. Yes.
Oh, we lost him. Yes, Madam Clerk.
Mr. McClatchy did let me know he was having technical issues this evening. I think his internet is bad where he is, so it looks like he is trying to come back, but that's why his camera is not on as well. I don't know if he's back or not.
Okay, so Mr. McClatchy, I'll give you another opportunity to speak if you're able. If you've got technical issues, I guess the members of the committee will have to send you an email and follow up that way offline, I guess. So I would invite all committee members to communicate by email directly with Mr. McClatchy about this item, because as you said already, he was present at the meetings and is in communication with the committee. Yeah. So Mr. McClatchy, if you can hear us, we can't hear you anymore, and we acknowledge your internet connection issues, and I guess we'll just have to move on. Does anyone else wish to speak to this item?
I apologize for that.
I heard that, but that's all I heard. Yeah, that's it. Anyways, any other questions, comments before we vote on the item? All right, I'll call do we have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation?
Mr. Chair, yes, we do. I have Councillor Neal and Councillor Orthanik.
Okay, so it's already moved and seconded, so I call the question. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. That was the last item. Madam Clerk, was there any correspondence?
Mr. Chair, no, there was not.
And I presume there's no motions, notices, motions, or other business. So our next meeting is actually next month, September 28th. That's our special meeting, I believe. Is that correct, Madam Clerk?
That's correct. That will be the special meeting.
So that's the special meeting where members of Transport Canada will come to speak to the Inner Harbour remediation. I believe that's the only agenda item for that meeting. And it is a Tuesday, but it's the fourth Tuesday of September. And with that being said, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Neal, Councillor Doherty. All those in favor? This meeting is adjourned at 9:49 p.m. Thank you for your diligence. Have a good the rest of the week, and we'll see you soon, everyone.